Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Discovery. Marco Allen stood in the sterile brightness of St. Mary's emergency room, his jaw clenched as he watched Dr. Patricia Henley examine his 7-year-old son Austin's head wound. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his weathered face, highlighting the crow's feet that spoke of too many years in the construction business and too many sleepless nights lately. "Dad, my head really hurts," Austin whimpered, his small fingers clutching Marco's calloused hand. "I know, buddy. The doctor's going to make it better," Marco said softly, though his voice carried an edge that made the nurse glance up nervously. Dr. Henley finished her examination and turned to Marco with a troubled expression. "Mr. Allen, I need to ask you some questions about how Austin sustained this injury. The pattern of the wound is concerning." Marco's dark eyes narrowed. He'd noticed the blood on Austin's pillow that morning when he'd gone to wake his son for school. Marla, his wife of 10 years, had already left for her supposed early morning yoga class, something that had become frustratingly routine over the past 6 months. "He fell down the stairs last night," Marco said carefully, watching the doctor's reaction. "Hit his head on the banister." Dr. Henley nodded slowly, making notes. "Mr. Allen, the injury pattern doesn't match a fall. This appears to be from blunt force trauma, possibly from a cylindrical object. I'm required by law to report this to Child Protective Services and the police." Marco felt a cold fury building in his chest, but his expression remained carefully neutral. 20 years of running his own construction company had taught him to keep his emotions in check, especially when dealing with incompetence or betrayal. "Doctor, I understand your protocols. Do what you need to do." 30 minutes later, Detective Roberto Tanner arrived. He was a tall, lean man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Marco recognized the type. He'd dealt with enough investigators over the years when construction accidents occurred on his job sites. "Mr. Allen, I'm Detective Tanner. Can you walk me through what happened last night?" Marco crossed his arms, his muscular frame tense. "Like I told the doctor, Austin fell down the stairs around 8:30. Hit his head pretty hard. My wife cleaned him up, put him to bed. We thought he was fine." "Where's your wife now?" "At work. She's an administrative assistant at Morrison Financial downtown." Marco's voice carried no emotion, though internally he was calculating. Marla's story about working extra hours lately had grown thin, especially considering the firm's managing partner, Julian Good, had called the house last week looking for her when she was supposedly working late. Detective Tanner studied Austin, who was now drowsy from the pain medication. "Son, can you tell me what happened to your head?" Austin's eyes were unfocused, but he managed to speak. "Uncle Donnie was playing with Mom in her room. They were making loud noises. I went to ask for water, and the door was locked. I hit my head on something when I tried to look through the keyhole. The silence in the room was deafening." Dr. Henley looked confused, but Detective Tanner's expression sharpened immediately. Marco felt the familiar rage that had been simmering for months suddenly crystallize into something cold and calculating. "Uncle Donnie?" Detective Tanner asked gently. "Mommy's friend. He comes over when Daddy works late." Marco's hands slowly curled into fists. "Donnie Kaiser. You should have known. Marla's old college friend who'd been hanging around more frequently, always with some excuse about needing advice or wanting to catch up. The bastard had been coming to his house, playing house with his wife while he was breaking his back to provide for his family." Detective Tanner looked at Marco. "Mr. Allen, I think we need to have a longer conversation. Can you call your wife and ask her to come down here?" "Of course," Marco said, his voice deadly calm. He pulled out his phone, noting it was 11:30 a.m. If Marla was really at work, she'd answer immediately. If she was with Donnie, the phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Marco tried again. Same result. "She must be in a meeting," he said to Detective Tanner, though they both knew better. Dr. Henley had stepped away to make her own calls. When she returned, her expression was grave. "Mr. Allen, I've spoken with the hospital social worker. Given the circumstances, we need to keep Austin here for observation and further evaluation. Child Services will need to investigate before he can go home." Marco nodded slowly. "I understand." "Detective, Are you treating this as a criminal investigation? At this point, we're investigating potential child endangerment. If there's evidence of abuse or neglect occurring in the home. Detective Tanner let the implication hang. Marco's mind was already working 3 steps ahead. This wasn't how he'd planned to discover the full extent of Marla's betrayal, but perhaps it was better this way. The legal system would provide him with tools he could use. Documentation, evidence, official records. Detective, I want to cooperate fully. If someone hurt my son, I want them held accountable. I appreciate that, Mr. Allen. I'll need you to come to the station later today to give a formal statement. In the meantime, try reaching your wife again. As the detective left and the medical staff continued their evaluation of Austin, Marco stepped into the hallway and called his foreman, Julius Lynch. Julius, I need you to handle the Riverside project today. Family emergency. Everything all right, boss? It will be, Marco said grimly. But I'm going to be tied up for the next few days. Maybe longer. After hanging up, Marco stood in the hospital corridor, his mind racing. 20 years ago, when he'd started Allen Construction from nothing, his grandfather had given him a piece of advice. Boy, there are 2 kinds of men in this world. Those who get mad and do something stupid, and those who get mad and do something smart. Be the second kind. Marco had built his business on that principle. When suppliers tried to cheat him, he didn't get angry. He got even, methodically and completely. When competitors tried to undercut his bids with shoddy work, he didn't just complain. He documented everything and used it to destroy their reputations. Now, standing in this hospital hallway with his son's blood on his conscience and his wife's betrayal burning in his chest, Marco Allen began to plan. But this wouldn't be about getting even. This would be about total annihilation. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Aaron English, a private investigator he'd used years ago when he suspected one of his project managers was stealing. Aaron had been thorough, discreet, and ruthless in his investigation. Aaron, it's Marco Allen. I need your services again. But this time, it's personal. Chapter 2, Unraveling Threads. The Allen family home on Maple Street had always been Marco's pride. He bought the 2-story colonial 15 years ago when Allen Construction first turned a real profit, and he'd personally overseen every renovation and improvement. The wraparound porch, the oak hardwood floors, the custom kitchen with granite countertops, all of it represented years of backbreaking work and careful saving. Now, as he stood in his living room at 6 p.m., waiting for Marla to come home, the house felt like a monument to his own stupidity. Aaron English sat across from him, a compact man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the demeanor of someone who'd spent too many years watching people's secrets unfold. His preliminary report lay open on the coffee table between them. How long has this been going on? Marco asked, his voice carefully controlled. From what I can determine, about 8 months. It started as coffee meetings, progressed to lunch dates, and then Aaron consulted his notes. The first hotel receipt I found was from 6 months ago. Marco picked up one of the photographs Aaron had provided. It showed Marla and Donnie Kaiser entering the Riverside Inn, a mid-tier hotel about 20 minutes from their neighborhood. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, a day Marco remembered working late on the Westfield Shopping Center project. Tell me about Kaiser, Marco said. Aaron flipped through his file. Donnie Kaiser, age 34. Works as a regional sales manager for Cumberland Pharmaceuticals. Divorced 3 years ago. Pays alimony to his ex-wife Tiffany Gibson. Lives in a downtown apartment. Drives a leased BMW. And has approximately $43,000 in credit card debt. Debts, Marco mused. What kind of debts? Gambling, mostly. Casino records show he's a regular at the riverboat. Lost big last month. Nearly $20,000 in one weekend. He's also behind on his alimony payments. Marco absorbed this information silently. A gambling addict with money problems, sleeping with his wife. The pieces were beginning to form a picture. What about their pattern? When do they meet? Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, usually between 2 and 5 p.m. Sometimes Friday mornings when you're on job sites. They've been careful, but not that careful. Kaiser's been texting her constantly. Aaron handed over a thick stack of phone records. I have a contact at the phone company. These are Marla's text logs for the past 3 months. Marco scanned the messages, his jaw tightening with each exchange. Can't wait to see you today. M is working late again. When are you going to tell him? This sneaking around is killing me. Soon, baby. Just need to figure out the right time. I love you more than anything. We deserve to be happy. The final message was from yesterday, just hours before Austin's injury. House is empty until 9. Come over. Marco set the phone records down and walked to the window, looking out at the street where he'd taught Austin to ride his bike just last summer. How did my son get hurt? Aaron's expression grew uncomfortable. From what I can piece together, Kaiser was at your house yesterday evening. Your son apparently tried to interrupt them and hit his head on something when he was trying to see into the locked bedroom. Probably the doorknob or the edge of a hallway table. And they just put him to bed? With a head injury? It appears so. Kaiser left around 9:30, according to the neighbor's security camera. Marco closed his eyes, fighting the urge to put his fist through the wall. His son had been hurt because 2 selfish adults couldn't keep their hands off each other, and they'd been too caught up in their own pleasure to properly care for an injured child. There's more, Aaron said quietly. Kaiser has been pushing Marla to file for divorce. He wants her to ask for alimony and half the assets. Based on their conversations, they're planning to move in together once the divorce is finalized. The front door opened, and Marla's voice called out, "Marco, are you home?" Marco turned to Aaron and spoke in a low voice. "I want everything. Every hotel receipt, every text message, every photograph. I want you to dig into Kaiser's finances, his gambling debts, his ex-wife situation. I want to know what he owes and to whom. Marco, whatever you're planning. I'm planning to protect my son and my assets. Nothing more." Marco's smile was cold. For now, Aaron gathered his files and slipped out the back door as Marla entered the living room. She looked tired, her blonde hair slightly disheveled, and Marco noticed she was wearing the same outfit she'd had on that morning. Not exactly what he'd expect from someone who'd supposedly been at work all day. "How's Austin?" she asked, setting her purse down. "I got your voicemail about the hospital. I was in meetings all day and couldn't get away." Marco studied his wife of 10 years. Marla had been beautiful when they'd met. She still was, in a carefully maintained way that spoke of regular salon visits and expensive skincare products. But looking at her now, he realized he'd been seeing only what he'd wanted to see for months. Austin has a head injury. They kept him overnight for observation. Marla's face showed appropriate concern, though Marco noticed she didn't ask for details about how the injury occurred. "Oh my God, is he okay? What happened?" "The doctors think someone hit him. They called the police." He watched her carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or fear. Marla's expression flickered for just a moment. Surprise, then calculation, before settling back into concerned innocence. "Hit him? Marco, that's terrible. Who would hurt a child? That's what the police want to know. Detective Tanner will probably want to talk to you tomorrow. They're investigating everyone who had access to the house yesterday." Now he saw real fear in her eyes. I was at work until almost 6 yesterday. You know that. Actually, I called Julian Good this morning to ask him to give you time off for the family emergency. Funny thing, he said you haven't worked late a single day this month. In fact, he said you've been leaving early most days. The silence stretched between them. Marco could see Marla's mind racing, trying to formulate an explanation that would hold water. "I've been running errands," she said finally. "Doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, things for the house." "What kind of doctor's appointments?" "Female issues. You wouldn't understand." Marco nodded slowly. "I'm sure. Well, the police will want to verify your whereabouts yesterday evening. They're being very thorough." Marla's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and quickly put it face down on the coffee table, but not before Marco caught a glimpse of the name, Donnie. "I should probably call the hospital," Marla said, reaching for the house phone. "Check on Austin." "Good idea. I'll make dinner while you do that." As Marla spoke to the hospital staff, Marco watched her performance. She played the concerned mother perfectly, asking all the right questions, expressing all the appropriate emotions. If he hadn't known better, he might have been convinced. But he did know better now. After Marla went upstairs to change clothes, Marco picked up her cell phone. It was password protected, but he'd seen her enter the code countless times. Austin's birthday. The phone unlocked immediately. The most recent messages were from Donnie. Did you hear from the police? We need to talk. This is bad. What if the kid remembers more? What if he tells him I was there? Meet me tomorrow at the usual place. We need to figure this out. Marco memorized the messages, then deleted them. Let Donnie wonder why Marla wasn't responding. As he prepared dinner, Marco's mind worked through the possibilities. The police investigation would eventually clear him of any wrongdoing, but would also create a paper trail documenting Marla's lies and inconsistencies. Aaron's investigation would provide additional evidence of the affair. But evidence of adultery wasn't enough. Not for what they'd done to Austin. Not for the months of lies and betrayal. Marco had built his construction business by thinking like an architect, seeing the entire structure before laying the first foundation stone. Now, as he planned his revenge against his cheating wife and her lover, he began to envision a different kind of construction project. He was going to systematically destroy both of their lives, piece by piece, until nothing remained but rubble. And just like his construction projects, it would be built to last. Chapter 3. Foundation Work. The next morning, Marco sat in the sterile interview room at the police station, his hands folded on the metal table as Detective Tanner reviewed his notes. Through the one-way window, he could see the parking lot where construction workers hurried to their job sites, unaware that their boss was planning the most important project of his career. Mr. Allen, I appreciate you coming in voluntarily, Detective Tanner said. Walk me through Tuesday evening one more time. Marco had rehearsed this moment. I got home around 7:15. Marla was in the kitchen making dinner. Austin was playing in the living room. We ate around 8, watched some TV, and put Austin to bed around 8:30. Marla and I watched a movie until about 10, then went to sleep. And you didn't notice anything unusual about Austin's behavior? He seemed tired, but that wasn't unusual. He'd had soccer practice after school. Marco paused, letting calculated concern show on his face. Detective, should I be worried about my wife? She's been different lately. Working late, secretive about her phone calls. Detective Tanner's pen stopped moving. Different how? Distant. Defensive when I ask about her day. Yesterday, when I tried to call her at work about Austin's injury, she didn't answer for hours. When she finally came home, she seemed more worried about covering her tracks than about her son. It was a careful balance, planting seeds of doubt without appearing to actively blame his wife. Marco had learned long ago that the best way to destroy someone was to let them destroy themselves. Mr. Allen, I have to ask, have you had any suspicions about your wife's fidelity? Marco let surprise and hurt flash across his face. What are you saying? Austin mentioned someone named Uncle Donnie being at your house. Do you know who that might be? Donnie Kaiser, Marco said slowly. He's an old friend of Marla's from college. He's been coming around more lately, but I thought. He trailed off, letting the implication hang. You thought what? I thought he was just being friendly. Going through a divorce, needed someone to talk to. But if you're suggesting... Marco's voice hardened. Detective, if that son of a bitch has been in my house with my wife while I'm working to support my family, I want to know about it. Detective Tanner leaned back in his chair. Mr. Allen, I need you to stay calm. We're still investigating. Calm. Marco stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. My son is in the hospital because someone was too busy screwing around to watch him properly. And you want me to stay calm? Sit down, Mr. Allen. Marco sat, but his hands remained clenched. I'm sorry. It's just, if Marla's been lying to me, if she's been putting Austin at risk. He shook his head. What do you need from me? Permission to examine your home, particularly the master bedroom and hallway where Austin was injured. We also need your wife's phone records and any security camera footage you might have. You have my full cooperation. I want the truth. After the interview, Marco drove to the hospital to check on Austin. His son was awake and alert, the head wound properly bandaged. The social worker, a thin woman named Kelsey Ward, was interviewing him when Marco arrived. Daddy, Austin reached for him, and Marco felt genuine emotion tighten his throat. Hey, buddy, how are you feeling? Better. The nurse gave me ice cream for breakfast. Kelsey Ward looked up from her notepad. Mr. Allen, I've been talking to Austin about Tuesday night. He's been very helpful. Marco sat on the edge of the hospital bed. What did you tell Miss Ward, Austin? I told her about Uncle Donnie's car in our driveway, and how Mommy told me not to bother them when her door was locked, and how I hit my head trying to see through the keyhole because I wanted water. The social worker made more notes. Austin, can you describe Uncle Donnie's car? It's blue and shiny, like Batman's car, but smaller. A BMW, Marco thought, just like Aaron had reported. Mr. Allen, Kelsey Ward said, I need to speak with your wife this afternoon. When would be a good time? She should be at work. Morrison Financial downtown. Though, Marco hesitated, playing his part. She's been having some personal issues lately. If she seems defensive or evasive, that's probably why. Another seed planted. That afternoon, Marco met with Aaron English at a coffee shop across from Morrison Financial. Through the window, they could see the building where Marla supposedly worked. I've been digging into Kaiser's finances, Aaron said, sliding a folder across the table. This guy's in serious trouble. He owes money to some very unpleasant people. Marco opened the folder and whistled softly. The documents showed gambling debts totaling nearly $60,000, including $30,000 owed to a loan shark named Malcolm Rosales, who operated out of the casino district. Rosales isn't just a loan shark, Aaron continued. He's connected to organized crime. Word is, Kaiser has missed 2 payment deadlines. Rosales has been asking questions about his assets, his job, his personal life. What kind of timeline is Kaiser working with? He needs to come up with $20,000 by next Friday, or Rosales starts getting creative about collecting. And get this, Kaiser's been telling people he's expecting a big windfall soon. Something about a business opportunity. Marco studied a photograph of Malcolm Rosales, a heavy-set man with cold eyes and scarred knuckles. Has Kaiser mentioned Marla to any of these people? Not by name, but he's been talking about his rich girlfriend whose husband owns a construction company. He's apparently told several people that she's going to leave her husband and they'll split the assets. The pieces were falling into place beautifully. Marco could see the entire structure now. How to use Kaiser's debts, Marla's greed, and the police investigation to create a perfect storm of destruction. I need you to do something for me, Marco said. I want you to approach Malcolm Rosales. Tell him you represent someone interested in Kaiser's situation. Someone who might be willing to provide information about Kaiser's assets in exchange for certain considerations. Aaron raised an eyebrow. Marco, that's dangerous territory. I'm not asking you to threaten anyone. I'm just suggesting that Rosales might appreciate knowing that Kaiser's rich girlfriend is married to someone who doesn't appreciate being cheated. And what exactly do you want Rosales to do with that information? Marco's smile was cold. Whatever comes naturally. That evening, Marco returned home to find Marla pacing the living room. Her phone pressed her ear. She was speaking in urgent whispers, but hung up quickly when he entered. How's Austin? She asked, attempting normalcy. Better. The social worker had some interesting questions for him. Marla's face went pale. What kind of questions? About Tuesday night. About who was at the house. About Uncle Donnie's blue car in our driveway. The phone in Marla's hand started buzzing. She glanced at it and declined the call, but Marco had seen the name. Donnie. Marla, we need to talk. Marco, sit down. She perched on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting together. Marco remained standing, using his height and presence to create psychological pressure. The police are going to want to interview you tomorrow. They're going to ask about your whereabouts Tuesday evening, about your relationship with Donnie Kaiser, and about why you lied about working late. I didn't lie. I called Julian Good. He told me you haven't worked a single late day this month. He also told me you've been using sick days and personal time without telling me. Marla's phone buzzed again. This time she turned it off completely. The social worker is also going to want to talk to you. She's particularly interested in why Austin was unsupervised long enough to injure himself. Why our bedroom door was locked. Why a 7-year-old boy was trying to look through keyholes instead of asking for help. Marco moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. But what really interests me, Marla, is why my wife of 10 years would risk our son's safety to fuck her college buddy in our bed. Marla's composure finally cracked. Tears started flowing, and she buried her face in her hands. Marco, I'm sorry. I never meant for Austin to get hurt. It just happened so fast, and we thought he was okay. The word hung in the air like a blade. Marla realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. So Kaiser was here, in our house, in our bed, while our son was injured and bleeding. Marco, please. How long? What? How long have you been fucking him? Marla flinched at his tone. 6 months. But Marco, it's not what you think. I love him. We won't be together. Marco nodded slowly. I see. And what exactly did you think would happen? That I just hand over half of everything I've worked for, so you could play house with some gambling addict? Gambling addict? Marco, Donnie doesn't gamble. Marco almost smiled. Even now, she was defending the man who was using her. Marla, your boyfriend owes $60,000 to a loan shark. He's been telling people that his rich girlfriend is going to solve all his problems. The color drained from Marla's face. That's not true. Ask him yourself. Better yet, ask Malcolm Rosales. Marla's phone, despite being turned off, somehow started ringing. The sound was impossible, but in her panicked state, she didn't notice. She turned it back on and saw 17 missed calls from Donnie. Call him, Marco said. Right now. Ask him about his debts. With shaking hands, Marla dialed Donnie's number. Marco could hear the panic in Kaiser's voice, even from across the room. Marla, thank God. We have a problem. Some guys came to my apartment asking questions about you, about Marco. They know about us. Marla looked at Marco with growing horror. What guys? I don't know, but they knew everything. They knew about the hotel, about Tuesday night, about Austin getting hurt. Marla, I think your husband hired someone. Marco watched his wife's world collapse in real time. The phone call continued, with Kaiser begging her to meet him, to run away together, to access Marco's accounts immediately. Finally, Marla hung up and looked at her husband with a mixture of fear and resignation. What do you want? She whispered. Marco sat down across from her, his expression calm and controlled. I want you to understand something, Marla. You and your boyfriend just made the biggest mistake of your lives. You put my son in danger. You violated my home. You tried to steal my assets. He leaned forward, and now you're going to help me destroy him. Chapter 4. Setting the Trap. Marco's office at Allen Construction overlooked the warehouse where his crews stored equipment and materials. The morning sun cast long shadows across stacks of lumber and steel beams. But Marco's attention was focused on the conference table where he'd spread out the blueprints for his revenge. Julius Lynch, his foreman, sat across from him reviewing work schedules. At 55, Julius was one of the few people Marco trusted completely. They'd worked together for 12 years, and Julius had never once given Marco reason to doubt his loyalty. Boss, the Riverside project is 2 days ahead of schedule, Julius reported. The electrical contractors want to start early if we can accommodate them. Good. What about the Westfield job? Material delivery is scheduled for Thursday. We'll need the crane for the steel work. Marco nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. His phone had been buzzing all morning with messages from Aaron English, Detective Tanner, and most importantly, Malcolm Rosales' people. The trap was beginning to close. Julius, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. The older man looked up from his papers. Shoot, if someone was stealing from his company, embezzling money, or selling information to competitors, what would you want me to do about it? Julius's weathered face hardened. I want you to bury them. This company is our livelihood. Marco, anyone who betrays that deserves whatever they get. What if it was someone we trusted? Someone close to the family? Makes it worse, not better. Julius leaned forward. Marco, what's going on? Marco made a decision. Marla's been cheating on me. The man she's sleeping with has gambling debts, and he's planning to use her to access our assets. I think they might try to go after the business accounts. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Julius spoke. What do you need me to do? For now, just keep everything running normally. But I may need you to make some changes to our security procedures, our bank access, things like that. Consider it done. After Julius left, Marco called Aaron English. Where do we stand with Rosales? He's very interested in your situation. Apparently, Kaiser's been bragging about his rich girlfriend for weeks. Rosales wants to meet with you tonight. Set it up. But Aaron, I want insurance. I want you recording everything, and I want backup nearby. Marco, are you sure about this? These aren't people you play games with. I'm not playing games. I'm solving problems. That afternoon, Marco drove to the hospital to visit Austin. His son was being discharged the next day, but the social worker wanted one more interview to ensure the home environment was safe. Kelsey Ward met him in the hallway outside Austin's room. Mr. Allen, I've completed my preliminary investigation. While we haven't found evidence of deliberate abuse, there are serious concerns about supervision and safety protocols in your home. What kind of concerns? Your wife's interview yesterday was problematic. She was evasive about her whereabouts Tuesday evening, and her story about Austin's injury kept changing. She also became very agitated when I asked about Mr. Kaiser. Marco nodded gravely. Miss Ward, I want to be completely honest with you. I believe my wife has been having an affair. I think she's been bringing this man to our house while I'm at work, and I think Austin was hurt because they were too distracted to properly supervise him. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Allen. I have evidence. Phone records, hotel receipts, witness statements. Detective Tanner has copies of everything. Kelsey Ward made notes. If that's the case, what are your plans regarding custody of Austin? I want full custody. I want supervised visitation for Marla until she can prove she's not putting our son at risk. And I want a restraining order keeping Kaiser away from Austin permanently. I'll include those recommendations in my report. After visiting with Austin, Marco drove across town to meet Malcolm Rosales. The meeting was at a warehouse in the industrial district, the kind of place where legitimate businesses operated during the day and other kinds of business happened after dark. Rosales was exactly what Marco had expected, a thick-set man in an expensive suit with eyes that calculated profit and loss in human terms. Two large men flanked him, but they remained silent throughout the conversation. Mr. Allen, I understand we have a mutual interest in Mr. Kaiser's situation. Marco kept his expression neutral. Mr. Kaiser owes you money. He's been claiming he'll pay you with assets that belong to me. I thought you should know that those assets aren't available to him. How much does he owe you? He doesn't owe me money. He owes me for sleeping with my wife in my house while my son was injured and bleeding. Rosales smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. A matter of honor. A matter of justice. What kind of timeline are we working with, Mr. Allen? Marco pulled out a folder containing copies of Marla's phone records and hotel receipts. My wife will be meeting with her lawyer next week to discuss divorce proceedings. Kaiser is expecting her to ask for alimony and half of my assets. He's told her the money will solve all his problems. And will she get that money? Not a penny. But Kaiser doesn't know that yet. Rosales studied the documents. This is very thorough, Mr. Allen. Very professional. I'm a detail-oriented person. What exactly are you proposing? Marco leaned forward. I'm proposing that you let Kaiser believe he's about to come into money. Let him think the divorce settlement will pay his debts. Then, when he realizes there's no money coming, you can collect your debt however you see fit. And in exchange, I'll make sure you have detailed information about Kaiser's actual assets, his employment situation, his daily routine. Everything you need to make an informed collection decision. Rosales was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Allen, you're asking me to wait for money that may never come. I'm asking you to wait for money that definitely won't come. The difference is you'll know that in advance, and you can plan accordingly. And what happens to your wife in all this? Marco's expression hardened. My wife made her choice when she decided to fuck another man in my bed while my son was bleeding in the hallway. She'll face the consequences of that choice. Rosales extended his hand. Mr. Allen, I think we could do business. As Marco drove home, his phone rang. It was Marla, and she sounded terrified. Marco, something's wrong. Donnie called me. He said men came to his workplace asking questions. His boss wants to see him tomorrow morning about irregularities in his expense reports. Marco pulled into his driveway before responding. What kind of irregularities? I don't know. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, things like that. Marco, they're going to fire him. Maybe they should. Marla, did it ever occur to you that your boyfriend might be using company money to pay for your hotel rooms? The silence on the phone told him everything he needed to know. Marco, I need to see you. We need to talk about this divorce, about Austin, about what happens next. Come home. We'll talk." An hour later, Marla sat in their living room, clutching a cup of coffee with shaking hands. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. "Marco, I know you hate me right now, but I need you to understand something. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant for Austin to get hurt. But it did happen, and now there are consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Marco sat across from her, his expression calm but implacable. "The police investigation is going to conclude that Austin was injured due to parental negligence. Child Services is going to recommend supervised visitation for you and a restraining order against Kaiser. The divorce court is going to see you as an unfit mother who abandoned her child for an affair." Marla's face crumpled. "What about the money? The assets? I'll need something to live on." "Marla, did you honestly think I was going to reward you for cheating on me? Did you think I'd just hand over half of everything I built so you could start a new life with your boyfriend? It's not about the money. It's exactly about the money. Kaiser's gambling debts, his pressure for you to file for divorce, his promises that everything would work out once you got your settlement. It's all about money." Marco pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. It displayed a text message from an unknown number. "Your boyfriend owes us $60,000. Payment is due Friday. We know where you live." Marla stared at the message in horror. "Marco, what is this?" "This is what happens when you get involved with a gambling addict who owes money to dangerous people. They've been watching Kaiser, following him, learning about his life. And now they know about you." "But I don't have that kind of money." "No, but they think you will." After the divorce settlement, Marla looked up at him with desperate eyes. "Marco, please. You have to help me. These people, they're dangerous." Marco studied his wife's face, seeing the fear and desperation there. For a moment, he almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Marla, I want you to understand something. You and Kaiser created this situation. You put my son at risk, you violated my trust, and you tried to steal my assets. Now you're asking me to protect you from the consequences. I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever papers you want. I'll give up all claims to the assets. Just please don't let them hurt me." Marco was quiet for a long moment, as if considering her offer. Finally, he spoke. "There might be a way to handle this, but it would require you to do exactly what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it. No questions, no arguments, no attempts to protect Kaiser. Anything. Tomorrow, you're going to call Kaiser and tell him you've been in touch with a divorce lawyer. You're going to tell him that the lawyer thinks you can get a large settlement, but it's going to take time to work through the legal process." "How long?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Marla nodded quickly. "Okay. And then what?" Marco's smile was cold and predatory. "Then we find out exactly what your boyfriend is willing to do when he's desperate." Chapter 5. Pressure Points. The Cumberland Pharmaceuticals office building stood 23 stories tall in the heart of downtown, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. From his car, parked across the street, Marco watched employees hurrying into the building, coffee cups in hand, briefcases swinging at their sides. At exactly 8:47 a.m., Donnie Kaiser emerged from the parking garage and walked toward the building entrance. Even from a distance, Marco could see the tension in the man's shoulders, the way he kept checking his phone, the nervous energy that spoke of a man running out of options. Marco's own phone buzzed with a text from Aaron English. "Security footage confirms Kay was at your house Tuesday, 7:30 to 9:45 p.m. Also, his company is launching an internal investigation today." Perfect timing. At 9:15 a.m., Marco entered the Cumberland Pharmaceuticals building and took the elevator to the 15th floor. The receptionist, a young woman with auburn hair and a professional smile, looked up as he approached. "Good morning. I'm here to see Arthur Ayers, the regional sales director. I'm Marco Allen from Allen Construction. Do you have an appointment, Mr. Allen?" "No, but I think Mr. Ayers will want to see me. It's regarding one of his sales managers, Donnie Kaiser." The receptionist's expression flickered with recognition. "Let me check with Mr. Ayers' assistant." 5 minutes later, Marco was seated in a corner office facing a thin man in his 50s with prematurely gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent his career managing difficult situations. "Mr. Allen, I understand you have information about one of my employees?" Marco placed a manila folder on the desk. Mr. Ayers, I believe Donnie Kaiser has been using company resources for personal activities. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, expenses that don't align with legitimate business purposes. Arthur Ayers opened the folder and examined the hotel receipts and credit card statements Aaron had compiled. His expression grew increasingly grim. Mr. Allen, how did you come by this information? Mr. Kaiser has been having an affair with my wife. These are copies of receipts from their meetings. As you can see, many of them were charged to what appears to be a company credit card. Ayers studied the documents more carefully. The Riverside Inn, the downtown Marriott, several restaurants. Mr. Allen, these charges total nearly $8,000 over 6 months. That's just what I could document. There may be more. What exactly are you asking me to do with this information? Marco leaned back in his chair. Nothing. I'm simply providing you with information that might be relevant to your company's internal policies. What you do with it is entirely your decision. Ayers was quiet for a moment. Mr. Allen, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Company policy is very clear about misuse of corporate resources. I understand completely. Will you be filing charges for fraud? Marco pretended to consider this. That depends on several factors. If Mr. Kaiser takes responsibility for his actions and makes appropriate restitution, I might be willing to consider alternative resolutions. What kind of restitution? Full repayment of the misused funds, plus interest, and a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing that could be used in my divorce proceedings. Ayers nodded slowly. I'll need to discuss this with our legal department, but I think we can work something out. As Marco left the Cumberland Pharmaceuticals building, his phone rang. It was Marla, and she sounded panicked. Marco, Donnie just called. He's been suspended from his job, pending an investigation. They're accusing him of embezzlement. That's unfortunate. Marco, did I what, Marla? Did you have something to do with this? Marco was quiet for a moment. Marla, are you asking me if I reported evidence of criminal activity to the appropriate authorities? Yes, I did. Your boyfriend has been stealing from his company to pay for hotel rooms where he could fuck my wife. Oh God. Marco, what's going to happen to him? That depends on whether he cooperates with the investigation and makes full restitution. It also depends on whether criminal charges are filed. Criminal charges? Embezzlement is a felony. Marla, $8,000 in misappropriated corporate funds. That's serious prison time. The line was quiet except for the sound of Marla crying. There might be a way to minimize the damage, Marco continued. But it would require Kaiser to be completely honest about his activities, his debts, and his intentions regarding our marriage. What do you mean? I mean, he needs to provide a full confession about the affair, his gambling problems, and his plan to use our divorce settlement to pay his debts. In writing, signed and witnessed. And if he does that, then I might be willing to work with Cumberland Pharmaceuticals on a restitution agreement instead of pursuing criminal charges. Another long silence. Marco, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Those men who've been asking questions about Donnie, the ones who threatened him about his gambling debts, did you arrange that? Marco smiled, though she couldn't see it. Marla, your boyfriend owes $60,000 to a loan shark. That's not something I arranged. That's something he did to himself. But the timing is because his creditors are getting impatient. They want their money. And they've been told that Kaiser is about to come into a large sum through his girlfriend's divorce settlement. Who told them that? Kaiser did. He's been bragging about it for weeks. At 2 p.m., Marco met with Detective Tanner at the police station. The detective had called that morning requesting another interview, and Marco suspected he knew why. Mr. Allen, we've completed our investigation into your son's injury. Based on the evidence, we're not pursuing criminal charges for child abuse. That's good to hear. However, we are recommending that Child Services maintain supervision of Austin's living situation until certain issues are resolved. What kind of issues? Detective Tanner consulted his notes. Your wife's inconsistent statements about Tuesday evening, evidence of an extramarital affair, and questions about the supervision of your son during the time of his injury. Marco nodded gravely. Detective, I want what's best for Austin. If that means supervised visitation for Marla until she can prove she's prioritizing his safety, then I support that decision. There's another matter we need to discuss. We've received information about potential fraud involving Mr. Kaiser's employment. Are you planning to file charges? That depends on whether Mr. Kaiser is willing to cooperate with resolving the situation. I'm more interested in protecting my family's assets than in sending anyone to prison. I understand. However, if Cumberland Pharmaceuticals decides to file charges, that decision won't be up to you. Of course not. After leaving the police station, Marco drove to his lawyer's office. Samuel Stanton was a sharp-dressed man in his 60s who specialized in divorce and family law. His office walls were lined with law books and framed photographs of successful cases. Marco, I've reviewed the documentation your investigator provided. This is about as clear-cut a case of adultery as I've ever seen. What kind of settlement can we expect? Given the evidence of infidelity, the child endangerment issues, and the apparent conspiracy to defraud marital assets, I'd say you're looking at full custody of Austin, minimal or no alimony from Marla, and retention of virtually all marital property. Marco leaned forward. What about Kaiser's involvement? Can we pursue him legally? Alienation of affection is still recognized in this state. We could potentially sue Kaiser for damages related to the destruction of your marriage. Given his apparent financial difficulties, it might not be worth pursuing monetarily, but would create additional legal pressure. Do it. I want him buried under legal problems. Consider it done. That evening, Marco returned home to find Marla pacing the living room with her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking in urgent whispers, but hung up quickly when she saw him. That was Donnie, she said. Marco, he's falling apart. He's been suspended without pay. His landlord is threatening eviction, and those men you mentioned, they came to his apartment again. What do they want? Money. They gave him until Friday to come up with $20,000, or they're going to start breaking things. Starting with his legs. Marco sat down and loosened his tie. That's unfortunate. Marco, please. I know you hate us both, but you can't just let them hurt him. Marla, I want you to understand something. Donnie Kaiser made a series of choices. He chose to gamble away money he didn't have. He chose to borrow from dangerous people. He chose to seduce a married woman. He chose to steal from his company. And he chose to put our son at risk. Marco's voice grew colder. Now he's facing the consequences of those choices. That's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to fix. But you could help him. You could loan him the money. Why would I do that? Because Marla struggled for words. Because you're a good man. Because you wouldn't want to see anyone hurt, even someone who wronged you. Marco studied his wife's face. Even now, after everything that had happened, she was trying to manipulate him into saving her lover. Marla, let me make something very clear. Donnie Kaiser is going to face the full consequences of his actions. He's going to lose his job, possibly face criminal charges, and deal with his creditors however he can. You're going to face the consequences of your actions too. What does that mean? It means you're going to help me make sure he understands exactly how hopeless his situation is. Marla's face went pale. What are you talking about? Marco pulled out his phone and showed her a text message. Meet me tomorrow at the Riverside Inn. Room 237. We need to talk about our future. D, you're going to meet him, Marco said, and you're going to deliver a message for me. Chapter 6. The Squeeze. The Riverside Inn sat on the outskirts of town like a monument to mediocrity, its faded brick facade and neon vacancy sign speaking to the kind of establishment that asked no questions and kept no records. Marco sat in his truck in the parking lot, watching the second-floor windows where he knew room 237 was located. At exactly 3 p.m., Marla's Honda Civic pulled into the lot. Through his binoculars, Marco watched his wife sit in her car for several minutes, clearly steeling herself for what was to come. She looked like she'd aged a decade in the past week. Her usually perfect blonde hair was unwashed and pulled back in a ponytail. Her face was pale and drawn, and her hand shook as she checked her phone one more time. Finally, she got out of her car and walked toward the motel stairs. Marco's phone buzzed with a text from Aaron English, who was positioned on the other side of the building. Kay arrived 10 minutes ago. Looks like he hasn't slept in days. This was the critical moment. Everything Marco had built over the past week. The police investigation, the job suspension, the pressure from creditors, the legal threats, All of it was designed to bring Donnie Kaiser to this point of maximum desperation. 30 minutes later, Marla emerged from the motel room. Even from a distance, Marco could see she was crying. Her phone rang immediately, and Marco answered on the first ring. "How did it go?" "Marco, please don't make me do this." Marla's voice was thick with tears. He's not the same person. He's desperate and angry and scared. When I told him there wasn't going to be any divorce settlement money, he grabbed me. Did he hurt you?" "Not physically. But Marco, he's talking about running away, about taking money from somewhere, about doing something desperate. I think he might hurt himself. Or someone else." The silence stretched between them. "Marla, did you deliver my message exactly as I told you?" "Yes. I told him that you knew about everything, that you had evidence, that the divorce wasn't going to result in any money for me. I told him that criminal charges were being filed for the embezzlement, and that his creditors knew he wasn't going to be able to pay." "And how did he react?" "He started talking about the construction company, about your assets, about how it wasn't fair that you got to keep everything while he lost everything. Marco, I think he might try to do something to your business." Marco had been expecting this. A desperate man with nothing left to lose was predictable in his unpredictability. Kaiser would either run, which would solve the problem permanently, or he would lash out, which would provide Marco with the justification he needed for the final phase of his plan. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. He left right after I did." "Marco, what if he goes to the police? What if he tells them about your meetings with those loan shark people?" Marco almost smiled. Even now, Marla was thinking about protecting herself rather than considering the broader implications. "Marla, if Kaiser goes to the police and claims that I somehow conspired with his creditors, what exactly do you think he's going to tell them? That he borrowed money from criminals to pay gambling debts, then try to steal from his company and destroy my marriage to get money to pay them back. But if they investigate, they'll find exactly what I want them to find. Documentation of Kaiser's debts, evidence of his theft, records of his affair with you, and proof that he endangered our son. They'll find a desperate criminal who's trying to blame everyone else for his problems." That evening, Marco was reviewing work schedules in his home office when his security system alerted him to movement in the driveway. Through his window, he could see a figure moving around his truck, partially obscured by the shadows from the oak trees that lined his property. Marco slipped out the back door and circled around the house, moving quietly through the darkness. As he approached his truck, he could see someone crouched beside the driver's side, working at something with a small tool. It was Donnie Kaiser, and he was slashing tires. Marco watched for a moment, letting Kaiser finish his work. When the man stood up and turned toward the house, Marco stepped out of the shadows. "Going somewhere, Donnie?" Kaiser spun around, a tire iron clutched in his hand. In the dim light from the street lamp, Marco could see that his wife's lover looked like hell. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, his face was unshaven, and his eyes had the wild look of a man who'd been awake for too long. "You son of a bitch," Kaiser said, raising the tire iron. "You destroyed my life." Marco didn't move, didn't show any sign of fear or aggression. "No, Donnie, you destroyed your own life. I just documented it. You set me up. You arranged everything. The investigation at work, the pressure from Rosales' people, all of it. I arranged nothing. You stole from your company. You borrowed money from criminals. You seduced my wife and endangered my son. I just made sure the right people had the right information at the right time." Kaiser took a step closer, the tire iron raised. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won. I think you're a gambling addict and a thief who's facing the consequences of his actions." "Consequences?" Kaiser laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about consequences? Fine. Let's talk about what happens when I tell everyone that Marco Allen hired criminals to threaten me. Let's talk about what happens when I tell them about your meetings with Rosales." Marco pulled out his phone and held it up so Kaiser could see the screen. It showed a video recording that had been running for the past 3 minutes. "You mean this conversation? Where you just admitted to vandalizing my property while carrying a weapon and threatening me on my own land?" Kaiser's face went white. "You're recording this?" "I've been recording everything, Donnie. Every conversation, every meeting, every interaction. Just like I recorded my meetings with Rosales, where I provided him with factual information about your debts and your claims about accessing my assets through my wife. Marco stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You see, that's the difference between us. I plan ahead. I document everything. I think through the consequences of my actions before I take them. You can't prove. I can prove you stole from your company. I can prove you were at my house the night my son was injured. I can prove you've been pressuring my wife to file for divorce so you could access assets that don't belong to you. And now I can prove you came to my home with a weapon and vandalized my property. Kaiser's grip on the tire iron loosened. What do you want? I want you to understand that your situation is hopeless. You owe money you can't pay to people who don't accept excuses. You're facing criminal charges for embezzlement. You have no job, no income, and no prospects. Your only choice is to disappear. I can't just disappear. Rosales' people will find me. Maybe, but that's not my problem. Kaiser stared at him for a long moment, then dropped the tire iron. You're a cold son of a bitch. You know that. I'm a man who protects what's his. And Marla? What happens to her? Marco's expression hardened. Marla chose you over her family. She chose your problems over her son's safety. She'll live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of her life. Kaiser turned and walked toward his car, but stopped at the edge of the driveway. This isn't over, Marco. Yes, it is. After Kaiser drove away, Marco called Detective Tanner and reported the vandalism and threats. Within an hour, a patrol car was parked outside his house, and an APB had been issued for Kaiser's arrest. At midnight, Marco's phone rang. It was Aaron English. Marco, we have a problem. Kaiser just robbed a convenience store across town. He got away with about $400, but the whole thing was caught on camera. Marco felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Anyone hurt? No, but he had a gun. This is now an armed robbery investigation. Where do you think he's headed? If he's smart, out of state. If he's desperate, he might try something even more stupid. Marco looked out his window at the police car parked in his driveway. Aaron, I want you to make sure Rosales knows about the robbery. I want him to know that Kaiser is now a wanted criminal who's likely to draw police attention wherever he goes. That's a dangerous game, Marco. It's not a game at all. It's pest control. The next morning brought news that Donnie Kaiser had been arrested trying to cross the state line. He'd been pulled over for speeding, and the officer had recognized him from the APB. In his car, police found the stolen money, the gun used in the robbery, and a notebook containing detailed information about Marco's business, his home address, and his daily routines. Marco read the news report while drinking his morning coffee, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Kaiser was now facing charges for armed robbery, embezzlement, stalking, and vandalism. Even with a plea bargain, he was looking at serious prison time. But the game wasn't over yet. There was still Marla to deal with, and Marco had saved the best for last. Chapter 7. Final Calculations. The law offices of Stanton and Associates occupied the top 2 floors of the Meridian building downtown, their mahogany-paneled conference rooms and brass fixtures projecting the kind of old-money respectability that impressed judges and intimidated opposing counsel. Marco sat at the head of the polished conference table, his hands folded calmly as he watched his soon-to-be ex-wife sign document after document. Marla looked broken. Her designer clothes hung loosely on her frame. She'd lost at least 15 pounds over the past month, and her once-perfect manicure was now bitten down to the quick. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and her hand shook slightly as she signed away her rights to everything she'd once taken for granted. The final custody agreement, Samuel Stanton announced, sliding another document across the table. Mr. Allen will have full legal and physical custody of Austin. Mrs. Allen will have supervised visitation every other Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., supervised by a court-appointed monitor. Marla's lawyer, a nervous young man named Matt Hanna who'd been assigned to her case through legal aid, cleared his throat. Mrs. Allen, you don't have to agree to these terms. We could fight for joint custody. With what? Marla's voice was barely above a whisper. I have no money for a prolonged legal battle, no job, no assets. Marco has documented evidence of adultery, child endangerment, and poor judgment. Any judge who reviews this case will see exactly what Marco wants them to see. She looked across the table at her husband, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and resignation. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Marco's expression remained neutral. I've simply documented the truth, Marla. You made choices, and now you're living with the consequences. The property settlement, Stanton continued, awards all real estate, business assets, retirement accounts, and investments to Mr. Allen. Mrs. Allen will receive her personal belongings and the Honda Civic, which is paid for. What about alimony? Matt Hanna asked weakly. Given Mrs. Allen's adultery and the documented evidence of her conspiracy to defraud marital assets, the court has waived any alimony claims, Stanton replied. However, Mr. Allen has agreed to provide her with $5,000 to assist with relocation expenses. Marla signed the final document and pushed it across the table. There. Are you satisfied now? Marco studied his wife's face for a moment. Once, he'd loved this woman enough to build a life with her, to trust her with his heart and his future. Now, looking at her defeated expression, he felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Almost, he said quietly. What do you mean, almost? Marco nodded to Stanton, who opened another folder. There's one more matter to address, the lawyer said. The criminal conspiracy charges. The color drained from Marla's face. What criminal charges? Conspiracy to commit fraud, Marco said. You and Kaiser conspired to defraud me of marital assets. You provided him with confidential financial information about my business. You participated in a plan to obtain money through false pretenses. But the divorce settlement. The divorce settlement is a civil matter. The criminal conspiracy is a separate issue entirely. Matt Hanna leaned forward frantically. Mr. Allen, your wife has cooperated fully with these proceedings. She's given up any claim to assets, agreed to minimal custody. She's done what any rational person would do when caught red-handed, Marco interrupted. But cooperation in divorce proceedings doesn't erase criminal activity. Marla stared at him in horror. Marco, you can't be serious. After everything I've already lost, you want to send me to prison? I want justice for what you did to our son. I want accountability for your betrayal. And I want to make sure you never have the opportunity to do this to another family. Stanton slid a final document across the table. However, Mr. Allen is prepared to be reasonable. This is a cooperation agreement. If Mrs. Allen agrees to provide full testimony about Kaiser's gambling debts, his pressure tactics, and his plan to use divorce proceeds to pay his creditors, Mr. Allen will recommend that charges be filed only against Kaiser. You want me to testify against Donnie? I want you to tell the truth about what happened. Under oath. On the record. Marla looked at her lawyer, who shrugged helplessly. Mrs. Allen, if Mr. Allen follows through with conspiracy charges, you could be looking at significant prison time. This agreement would allow you to avoid prosecution entirely. What would I have to testify to? Marco answered directly. That Kaiser pressured you to file for divorce, specifically to gain access to my assets. That he provided you with specific information about his gambling debts and his need for money. That he was present in our home the night Austin was injured. And that you both prioritize your sexual encounter over our son's safety. And if I refuse, then you'll face the full consequences of your actions. Criminal charges, prison time, and a felony record that will follow you for the rest of your life. The silence in the conference room stretched for several minutes. Finally, Marla spoke. If I sign this, if I testify, what happens to me afterwards? You'll be free to rebuild your life however you see fit. But you'll do it somewhere else. The cooperation agreement includes a provision that you relocate at least 500 miles away and have no contact with me or Austin except for court-supervised visitation. You're banishing me. I'm giving you a chance to start over. It's more than you deserve. Marla picked up the pen with shaking hands and signed the cooperation agreement. 2 weeks later, Marco sat in the gallery of the county courthouse as Marla took the witness stand in Donnie Kaiser's criminal trial. Kaiser had been denied bail due to the armed robbery charges, and his court-appointed attorney was fighting a losing battle against overwhelming evidence. Marla's testimony was devastating. She spoke clearly and directly about Kaiser's gambling addiction, his mounting debts, and his increasingly desperate attempts to access Marco's assets through their marriage. She described in detail how Kaiser had pressured her to file for divorce, how he provided her with specific dollar amounts he needed to pay his creditors, and how he'd been present in their home the night Austin was injured. "Mrs. Allen," the prosecutor asked, "did Mr. Kaiser ever express concern for your son's welfare?" "No," Marla replied, her voice steady. "When Austin was hurt, Donnie's only concern was that he might tell someone about seeing us together. He wanted to leave immediately before Marco came home." "And what was your response?" "I told him we needed to check on Austin first, make sure he was okay. But Donnie said it was just a bump on the head and that kids were resilient." From the defendant's table, Kaiser stared at Marla with undisguised hatred. His lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: armed robbery, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and child endangerment. The judge sentenced Kaiser to 12 years in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 8 years. As the bailiff led Kaiser away in shackles, he turned toward the gallery where Marco sat watching. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. Marco smiled and mouthed back, "Yes, it is." After the trial, Marco met with Detective Tanner one final time to tie up loose ends. Kaiser's creditors have been notified that he won't be making any payments for the foreseeable future, the detective reported. Malcolm Rosales has apparently written off the debt as a loss and moved on to other business interests. And Marla, she's moving to Phoenix next week. New name, new job, new life. The cooperation agreement protects her from prosecution, but she'll be under federal supervision for the next 5 years. Marco nodded. "What about the custody arrangement?" "Austin is doing well in counseling. The supervised visitation with his mother seems to be helping him process what happened. The therapist thinks he'll make a full recovery, both physically and emotionally." "Good. That's all that matters." That evening, Marco sat on his front porch watching Austin play in the yard with a new soccer ball. His son's head wound had healed completely, leaving only a small scar that would fade with time. The boy's laughter filled the evening air, and Marco felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. Julius Lynch pulled into the driveway and walked up to the porch, carrying a folder of paperwork from the business. "Boss, the insurance settlement came through on the equipment that was vandalized," he reported. "Full replacement value plus compensation for lost productivity." "Excellent. And the Riverside project?" "Finished 2 days ahead of schedule. The client is so happy they're talking about hiring us for their next 3 developments." Marco smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. "Julius, take tomorrow off. Take your wife somewhere nice for dinner. You've earned it." As his foreman drove away, Marco's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, he tensed, wondering if somehow Kaiser or his associates had found a way to reach him from prison. But the message was from Aaron English. Marla's flight to Phoenix departed on schedule. No issues. Case officially closed. Marco deleted the message and put his phone away. He called Austin over to the porch, and they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. "Dad," Austin said quietly, "is Mommy ever coming back?" Marco put his arm around his son's shoulders. "She'll visit sometimes, buddy, but she made some bad choices, and now she has to live somewhere else. Because she hurt me, because she forgot that families are supposed to protect each other. But you don't have to worry about that anymore. It's just you and me now, and I'll always protect you." Austin leaned against his father's side. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, son." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marco reflected on the events of the past month. Some people might call what he'd done excessive, even cruel. But those people had never been betrayed by someone they trusted, never watched their child suffer because of someone else's selfishness, never had to rebuild their life from the ashes of someone else's lies. Marco Allen had learned long ago that the world was divided into 2 kinds of people: those who built things up and those who tore things down. He'd spent his life building, his business, his home, his family. When someone had tried to tear down what he'd built, he'd responded with the same methodical precision he brought to every construction project. He'd identified the problem, gathered the right tools, and systematically dismantled the threat until nothing remained but rubble. And now, sitting on his porch with his son's safe beside him, Marco knew that he'd built something that would last. A life free from the poison of betrayal, a future built on truth instead of lies, and a legacy that would protect his son for years to come. Some people might call it revenge. Marco called it justice. And justice, like a well-built foundation, was designed to endure. Chapter 8. Cleanup Operations. 6 months after the trial, Marco stood in the marble lobby of the First National Bank building, watching as the electronic board displayed the morning's interest rates and market indicators. The meeting he was about to attend would finalize the last piece of his reconstruction project, and like every other aspect of his methodical campaign, it had been planned down to the smallest detail. Austin was in school now, thriving in his new routine. The boy had adapted remarkably well to their new life. No more walking on eggshells around his mother's moods. No more confusion about why mommy's friend was always visiting when daddy wasn't home. The child psychologist had pronounced Austin's recovery complete, noting that children were often more resilient than adults when removed from toxic situations. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, and Marco walked down the carpeted hallway to the offices of Morrison Financial. This was where Marla had claimed to work late so many evenings, and where Marco was now about to conclude a business deal that would eliminate the last potential complications from his former wife's betrayal. Julian Good rose from behind his mahogany desk as Marco entered the corner office. At 62, Good was everything Marco had expected from Marla's description. Silver-haired, expensively dressed, and possessed of the kind of practice charm that wealthy men use to navigate delicate situations. "Mr. Allen, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Please have a seat." Marco settled into the leather chair across from Good's desk and studied the man who had been Marla's boss during her affair. "Mr. Good, when you called last week, you mentioned there were some lingering issues related to my ex-wife's employment here." "Yes, unfortunately there are." Good opened a file folder and consulted several documents. "As you know, Marla was terminated from her position here following her arrest. However, during our internal investigation, we discovered some irregularities that we felt you should be aware of." Marco kept his expression neutral. "What kind of regularities?" "Access to client files, printing of confidential documents, unusual computer activity during non-business hours. It appears that Marla may have been gathering information about high-net-worth clients, possibly for purposes related to her personal situation." This was news to Marco, though he didn't let his surprise show. During his campaign against Kaiser and Marla, he'd focused on their direct actions, the affair, the conspiracy, the child endangerment. He hadn't investigated whether Marla might have been attempting to steal client information for additional leverage. "What kind of information?" "Asset valuations, investment portfolios, estate planning documents. The kind of information that could be valuable to someone planning to file for divorce or someone looking to assess potential targets for fraud." Good slid a thick folder across the desk. "We've compiled everything we found. Copies of documents she accessed, logs of her computer activity, records of files she printed or downloaded." "Mr. Allen, I need to ask, did your ex-wife ever mention our clients or their financial situations?" Marco reviewed the documents, his mind racing. Marla had access to detailed financial information about dozens of wealthy individuals and families. If she'd been planning to use this information as leverage in their divorce, or if she'd shared it with Kaiser as part of their conspiracy, the implications were staggering. "Mr. Good, some of these clients, these are very prominent people." "Exactly, which is why we need to handle this situation very carefully. If word gets out that client confidentiality was breached, it could destroy our reputation and expose us to massive liability." Marco understood immediately why Good had called him. Morrison Financial needed to contain this situation, and Marco was the key to their strategy. "What are you proposing?" Good leaned forward. "We're prepared to offer you a consulting contract with our firm, a substantial retainer to help us assess and mitigate any potential security breaches in our systems. In exchange, We would ask for your discretion regarding these documents and your assistance in ensuring that any information your ex-wife may have obtained doesn't surface in the future. The offer was elegant in its simplicity. Morrison Financial would pay Marco a significant sum to essentially buy his silence about Marla's activities, while also giving him access to high-net-worth clients who might need construction services. Marco would gain financially while helping the firm protect itself for the consequences of his ex-wife's crimes. How substantial a retainer are we discussing? $200,000 annually for the next 3 years, with the possibility of renewal, plus bonuses for specific consulting projects. Marco considered the offer. $600,000 was serious money, enough to expand his business significantly or to secure Austin's college education. But more importantly, it would give him leverage over any future attempts by Marla or her associates to cause trouble. Mr. Good, I appreciate the offer, but I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Was Marla working alone, or was someone else involved in accessing this information? Our investigation suggests she was working alone, but we can't be certain. The computer logs show that most of the unauthorized access occurred during evening hours when the building was mostly empty. Evening hours when she was supposedly working late. Exactly. Marco made his decision. I'll accept your consulting contract, Mr. Good, but I have some additional requirements. What kind of requirements? I want full access to your security footage from the past year. I want copies of all documents Marla accessed or printed. And I want a complete list of any external contacts she may have had while working here. Good hesitated. Mr. Allen, that's quite extensive. May I ask why you need such detailed information? Because if my ex-wife was stealing confidential information from your clients, there's a possibility she wasn't acting entirely on her own. I want to make sure that all potential threats to your firm's reputation are identified and neutralized. The implication was clear. Marco might be able to help Morrison Financial not just contain the damage from Marla's activities, but also identify and eliminate any other potential problems. I think we can accommodate those requests, Good said finally. 2 hours later, Marco sat in his truck in the Morrison Financial parking garage, reviewing the documents Good had provided. The scope of Marla's activities was broader than he'd imagined. She'd accessed files on over 40 clients, including several whose names Marco recognized from the newspaper society pages. But one name jumped out at him, Alberto Wilkerson. Wilkerson was a real estate developer who'd been competing with Allen Construction for several major projects over the past 2 years. He was also, according to the files, a client whose investment portfolio included significant holdings in casino and entertainment properties. Marco's phone rang. It was Aaron English. Aaron, I need you to do some research for me. Alberto Wilkerson. I want to know everything about his business dealings, his associates, and any connections he might have to gambling or loan shark operations. What's this about, Marco? Insurance. I want to make sure there are no other surprises waiting for me. That evening, Marco picked up Austin from his after-school program and drove home through the familiar streets of their neighborhood. The boy chattered excitedly about his day. A successful presentation in social studies, a goal scored during recess soccer, plans for a classmate's birthday party on the weekend. It was the kind of normal, healthy childhood conversation that Marco had feared might be lost forever during the chaos of the past year. But Austin had proven remarkably resilient, adapting to their new life with the flexibility that children possessed when removed from toxic situations. Dad, can we have pizza for dinner tonight? Sure, buddy, but you have to eat some vegetables too. Can we get the pizza with the vegetables on it? Marco smiled. That's a good compromise. As they pulled into their driveway, Marco noticed a car parked across the street that he didn't recognize. A dark sedan with tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that professional investigators or security personnel preferred. Marco's instincts, honed by months of careful planning and execution, immediately went on alert. He parked in the garage and walked Austin into the house through the connecting door, then moved to the front window to observe the sedan. It sat there for 20 minutes before driving away. Marco called Aaron English immediately. Aaron, I need surveillance detection on my house and office. Someone's watching me, and I want to know who and why. On it. Marco, any idea what this might be about? Maybe. I'll know more tomorrow. The next morning brought answers. Aaron called while Marco was reviewing job site reports in his office. The sedan belongs to a private security firm called Steele Investigations. They specialize in corporate security and asset protection. Their client list includes some very high-end individuals and businesses. Any connection to Morrison Financial or Alberto Wilkerson? Not directly. But get this, Steele Investigations was hired last week by someone to conduct a background investigation on you. The contract was paid for in cash, and the client information is sealed. Marco felt the familiar cold clarity that came when a new threat emerged. Someone with serious resources was investigating him, which meant someone believed he posed a threat to their interests. Aaron, I want you to find out who hired Steele Investigations. Use whatever resources you need. Marco, that's going to be expensive and potentially dangerous. These aren't amateurs we're dealing with. Neither am I. That afternoon, Marco made a decision that would have surprised his enemies. He called Detective Tanner and requested a meeting. Detective, I have reason to believe that I'm being investigated by parties unknown, possibly in connection with my ex-wife's criminal activities. I want to cooperate fully with any official investigation, but I also want protection from any unofficial activities. Tanner leaned back in his chair. What kind of unofficial activities? The kind that involve cash payments to private investigators and surveillance of my home, where my 7-year-old son lives. Marco, do you have any idea who might be interested in investigating you? I have suspicions, but I prefer to let the evidence speak for itself. Marco slid a copy of the Morrison Financial documents across the desk. Detective, I think you're going to find this very interesting reading. As Tanner reviewed the evidence of Marla's theft of confidential client information, Marco felt the familiar satisfaction of a plan coming together. By bringing the police into the situation, he was transforming what could have been a private conflict into an official investigation. And official investigations, as Marco had learned, were much easier to control than private vendettas. Chapter 9, Permanent Foundation. 1 year later, Marco stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his new office on the 20th floor of the Meridian building, looking down at the city where he'd built his empire and destroyed his enemies. Allen Construction now occupied an entire floor of the prestigious downtown tower, with contracts worth over $50 million and a reputation for precision and reliability that was unmatched in the region. Austin, now 8 years old, sat at the conference table doing his homework while Marco finished reviewing the quarterly financial reports. The boy had grown taller and more confident over the past year, his easy smile and quick wit showing no lasting trauma from the events that had reshaped their lives. Dad, Mrs. Rodriguez wants to know if you can come to Career Day next week, Austin said, looking up from his math worksheet. Of course, buddy. What should I tell the class about construction? Tell them about how you build things that last forever. Marco smiled at his son's choice of words. Building things that lasted forever had indeed become his specialty, though not always in ways that Austin could understand. The phone rang, and Marco answered to find Samuel Stanton on the line. Marco, I have the final report on the Morrison financial situation. You're going to want to hear this. Go ahead. Alberto Wilkerson has been arrested on federal racketeering charges. Turns out he was laundering money for organized crime through his real estate deals and casino investments. The evidence that broke the case? Financial documents that were stolen from Morrison Financial and anonymously provided to the FBI. Marco absorbed this information with satisfaction. When Aaron English's investigation had revealed that Wilkerson was the one having Marco surveilled, it had taken only a small leap of logic to realize that Wilkerson must have been involved in the criminal activities that Marla had inadvertently uncovered. Any connection to our situation? The FBI believes Wilkerson was concerned that you might have access to the stolen Morrison financial documents and might eventually discover his money laundering operation. He was conducting surveillance to assess the threat level. And Marla? Wilkerson apparently never knew that she was the one who accessed his files. He thought the leak came from a disgruntled employee or a business rival. Your ex-wife's activities were just the catalyst that exposed a much larger criminal enterprise. Marco looked out at the city skyline, where several buildings bore the Allen Construction logo. What about our consulting contract with Morrison Financial? Still active and very profitable. Julian Good considers you something of a hero for helping expose the security breach that led to Wilkerson's arrest. I wouldn't be surprised if they offer you additional contracts. After hanging up with Stanton, Marco walked over to the conference table where Austin was finishing his homework. All done, buddy? Yep. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Austin's expression grew serious. Do you ever think about Mommy? Marco considered his answer carefully. Over the past year, Austin had occasionally asked about Marla, though the questions had become less frequent as time passed. The supervised visits had ended 6 months ago when Marla had failed to appear for 3 consecutive appointments, apparently having decided that starting fresh in Phoenix was more important than maintaining a relationship with her son. Sometimes, Marco said honestly, "Do you?" Sometimes, but not in a sad way anymore. More like remembering a story someone told me once. Marco was struck by the wisdom in his son's observation. Marla had indeed become like a story, something that had happened to them rather than something that continued to affect their daily lives. That's a good way to think about it, Austin. The past is just a story. What matters is what we build going forward. That evening, after Austin had gone to bed, Marco sat in his home office reviewing the final documents from his year-long reconstruction project. Every loose end had been tied up, every potential threat had been neutralized, every enemy had been defeated or eliminated. Donnie Kaiser was serving his 12-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, his appeals exhausted and his former associates having moved on to other business interests. Marla had built a new life in Phoenix under her maiden name, working as a receptionist for a medical practice and living in a modest apartment that reflected her reduced circumstances. Alberto Wilkerson was facing decades in federal prison for racketeering and money laundering. And Marco? Marco had emerged from the wreckage of his marriage stronger, wealthier, and more secure than ever before. His phone buzzed with a text message from Aaron English. Final surveillance sweep completed. No threats detected. All targets neutralized. Contract complete. Marco deleted the message and powered down his phone. Aaron had been conducting quarterly security assessments for the past year, ensuring that no new threats emerged from the ashes of the old ones. But this would be the last such assessment. The war was over, and Marco had won completely. He walked upstairs to check on Austin, finding his son sleeping peacefully in his bed, a soccer ball clutched in his arms and a smile on his face. This was what victory looked like, not the destruction of his enemies, but the protection of what mattered most. Marco had learned something important during his campaign of calculated revenge. Destruction was easy, but construction required patience, skill, and vision. Anyone could tear something down in a moment of rage or desperation. But building something that would last, whether it was a skyscraper, a business, or a life, required the kind of methodical precision that most people couldn't sustain. 6 months later, Marco received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from Phoenix publication. Local woman dies in car accident. Marla Petty, 34, was killed instantly when her vehicle collided with a semi-truck on Interstate 10 during a rainstorm. Police report that alcohol may have been a factor. Ms. Petty is survived by a son in another state. Marco read the clipping twice, then burned it in his fireplace. He felt no satisfaction at the news, no sense of victory or vindication. Marla's death was simply the final punctuation mark on a story that had ended long ago. Austin never learned about his mother's death. When the boy stopped asking about her entirely, Marco made the decision that some information was better left buried. Austin's life was full of soccer practice, school friends, construction site visits, and 1,000 small joys of childhood free from adult complications. On Austin's 9th birthday, Marco hosted a party in their backyard for 20 of the boys' classmates. As he watched his son laugh and play with his friends, Marco reflected on the man he'd become over the past 2 years. Some people might call him ruthless or vindictive. Others might say he'd gone too far in his pursuit of justice. But Marco knew the truth. He was simply a man who protected what belonged to him, who built things that lasted, and who never forgot that actions had consequences. Julius Lynch approached him during the party, carrying a beer and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who'd helped build something important. "Boss, I've got to say, seeing Austin this happy, it makes everything worthwhile. Marco nodded, watching his son kick a soccer ball with his friends. Julius, can I ask you something? Do you think I did the right thing? The older man was quiet for a moment. Marco, I've been in construction for 35 years. I've seen a lot of buildings come and go, a lot of men succeed and fail. The ones who last, the ones who build things that endure, they're the ones who understand that a good foundation is everything. Julius gestured toward Austin, who was now organizing his friends into teams for a game. That boy has a solid foundation now. No cracks, no weak spots, no rut that's going to bring the whole structure down later. Whatever you had to do to build that foundation, well, that's between you and your conscience. Marco smiled. That's good enough for me. As the sun set over the city where Marco Allen had built his empire and protected his son, the sounds of children's laughter filled the air. It was the sound of innocence preserved, of safety secured, and of a future built on an unshakable foundation. Some men built monuments to their own glory. Others built walls to keep the world at bay. But Marco had built something more important than either. A life free from the poison of betrayal, a legacy of strength and protection, and a son who would grow up knowing that some things in this world were worth fighting for. And that, Marco knew, was a construction project that would last forever. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Empire's Shadow. Roman Castellano stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his father's corner office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a chessboard waiting for the next move. At 34, he possessed the sharp features of old Italian nobility mixed with the cold calculation of American business. Dark eyes that missed nothing, a jaw that never showed weakness. The Castellano Empire stretched across 3 states, legitimate businesses fronting more profitable ventures that existed in society's gray spaces. Vincent Castellano had built this kingdom from nothing, transforming a small construction company into a sprawling network of enterprises. Construction, waste management, real estate development, private security, all interconnected, all profitable, all requiring the kind of respect that came from understanding power's true nature. Roman had been groomed for this moment since childhood. While other kids play video games, he studied balance sheets. While they went to summer camp, he shadowed department heads, learning every aspect of the business. Vincent had been methodical in his son's education. A king without knowledge is just a target, Roman. Never forget that. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Vincent Castellano, age 61, had suffered a massive heart attack in his study, dead before the paramedics arrived. Roman had driven through empty streets to the family estate, his mind already shifting from grief to necessity. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when hundreds of employees, dozens of operations, and millions in revenue hung in the balance. The funeral was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Legitimate business associates mingled with men whose handshakes carried the weight of unspoken agreements. Politicians offered condolences while mentally recalculating their allegiances. Roman stood at the graveside, his wife Ava beside him in designer black, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that looked supportive but felt performative. Ava Morrison had entered his life 5 years ago at a charity gala, a striking blonde with a psychology degree from Columbia and an art gallery in Soho. She moved through high society with practiced grace, understanding exactly how much vulnerability to show, how much mystery to maintain. Roman had been captivated by her intelligence, her ability to navigate his world's complexities without flinching. They'd married after a whirlwind 18-month courtship that felt like destiny. But destiny, Roman was learning, was often just camouflage calculation. The company's headquarters occupied 12 floors of a Manhattan skyscraper, its clean lines and modern artwork hiding the true nature of its business. Roman's first official day as CEO began with a board meeting at 8 a.m. sharp. 12 faces around the polished conference table, some family, some longtime associates, all supposedly loyal. Frank Torino, his father's oldest friend and the company's CFO, handled the formal transition. Vincent always said this day would come. Roman's been preparing for it his whole life. But Frank's eyes held something Roman couldn't quite identify. Calculation mixed with what might have been pity. The morning moved with mechanical efficiency. Department heads presented status reports, quarterly projections, operational updates. Everything appeared normal, stable, ready for new leadership. Roman signed documents, approved budgets, made decisions with the confidence Vincent had drilled into him. It was during lunch that he noticed the first crack in the facade. His assistant, Maria Santos, a woman who'd worked for Vincent for 15 years, seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact. When he asked about his afternoon schedule, her hands trembled slightly as she handed him the appointment book. "Everything all right, Maria?" "Of course, Mr. Castellano. Just adjusting to the changes." But Roman had learned to read people the way others read newspapers. Maria wasn't adjusting, she was afraid. The afternoon brought more subtle signs. Conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Glances exchanged between longtime employees. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he walked past offices. By 5 p.m., Roman felt like he was walking through a building full of strangers wearing familiar faces. He stayed late that evening, alone in his father's, now his, office. The space felt hollow without Vincent's presence, like a theater between performances. Roman opened the safe his father had shown him years ago, finding personal documents, emergency cash, and a sealed envelope marked for Roman's eyes only. Inside, Vincent's handwriting filled 3 pages with names, dates, and detailed observations about loyalty within the organization. The final paragraph hit like a physical blow. "If you're reading this, I'm gone and you're in charge. Trust no one completely, not even family. Power reveals character, and succession reveals everyone's true intentions. Watch Ava closely. She's been asking too many questions about business operations lately. A beautiful woman with expensive tastes and divided loyalties is more dangerous than any competitor. Remember, respect is earned, fear is given, but betrayal is chosen. Choose your responses accordingly." V. Roman set the letter down with steady hands, though his mind raced. Vincent had suspected something, seen patterns Roman had missed. His father's instincts had kept the empire intact for 30 years. They weren't observations to dismiss lightly. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt longer than usual. Roman's BMW waited in its designated spot, but he took a moment before starting the engine, processing the day's revelations. His father was gone. He was now responsible for an empire built on carefully maintained relationships and precisely calculated risks. And according to Vincent's final message, the people closest to him might be planning his destruction. The drive to their Westchester estate took 45 minutes, giving Roman time to compartmentalize his thoughts. The house sat on 12 acres of manicured landscape, its modern architecture suggesting wealth without ostentation. Ava's Porsche was already in the circular driveway. She'd left the office early for a spa appointment. Roman found her in the living room, perfectly dressed despite supposedly spending the afternoon at a spa, nursing a glass of white wine while scrolling through her phone. She looked up with a smile that at first captured his attention. Warm, genuine, designed to make him forget whatever concerns occupied his mind. "How was your first day as the big boss?" Her tone carried playful affection, but Roman now heard something else underneath. A fishing expedition disguised as wifely interest. "Productive," he replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Learning the rhythms, understanding the current projects. And, are you going to make changes?" The question came too quickly, with too much focus. Roman studied his wife's face, looking for tells he'd previously missed. "Some adjustments are inevitable." "Why do you ask?" Ava's laugh sounded forced. Just curious about your plans. This is a big transition for both of us. They ate dinner on the terrace, conversation flowing around safe topics, the weather, weekend plans, renovations Ava wanted to make to the guest house. But Roman found himself analyzing every word, every gesture, every pause. His father's warning had shifted his perspective like adjusting a telescope's focus. Suddenly, details that seemed normal revealed themselves as potentially significant. After dinner, Ava excused herself for a bath, claiming the day had been stressful. Roman retreated to his study, ostensibly to review quarterly reports, but actually to think. Vincent's letter had been specific about Ava asking questions about business operations. Roman replayed recent conversations, looking for patterns he'd missed. 3 weeks ago, she'd asked about the company's private security division. 2 weeks ago, she'd wondered about the real estate holdings in New Jersey. Last week, she'd inquired about Frank Torino's role in day-to-day operations. At the time, these seemed like natural curiosity from a spouse trying to understand her husband's professional life. Now they felt like intelligence gathering. Roman opened his laptop and began reviewing email traffic from the past month, looking for any communication that seemed out of place. His access to the company's internal systems was comprehensive. Vincent had made sure his heir could monitor every aspect of the business. What he found in Ava's email account made his blood run cold. She'd been corresponding with someone using an encrypted messaging service, discussing contingency plans and timeline adjustments. The timestamps showed these conversations had been happening for months, long before Vincent's death. Roman leaned back in his chair, pieces clicking into place like a combination lock. Ava hadn't just been gathering information. She'd been planning for Vincent's death, preparing for the power transition that would leave Roman vulnerable. The house settled around him as night deepened, but Roman remained awake, his mind working through implications and possibilities. His wife, the woman who shared his bed, his secrets, his future plans, had been systematically betraying him while playing the role of supportive spouse. Vincent's final lesson was becoming clear. The most dangerous enemies wore the faces of allies, and the most devastating betrayals came from those granted the deepest trust. Roman closed the laptop and sat in darkness, feeling the weight of his inheritance settling on his shoulders. He now controlled an empire, but discovered his kingdom was riddled with traitors. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new tests of his resolve. But tonight, in the silence of his study, Roman Castellano began planning his response to betrayal. His father had taught him that respect and fear were the twin pillars of power. It was time to teach some lessons about both. Chapter 2. The Crown of Thorns. Roman arrived at the office before dawn, the Manhattan streets still quiet except for delivery trucks and early commuters. The building's lobby felt different now. He wasn't Vincent's son visiting the family business, but the man whose decisions would determine everyone's future. The elevator's ascent to the executive floor gave him precious minutes to settle into his new role completely. Maria Santos was already at her desk, steam rising from a fresh cup of coffee. Her surprise at seeing him so early was genuine. Vincent had rarely arrived before 8 a.m. "Good morning, Mr. Castellano. I wasn't expecting you until—" "Plans change, Maria. I need the employee personnel files for all department heads, plus anyone with access to confidential operational information. Have them on my desk in 30 minutes. Her hesitation lasted only a second, but Roman caught it. "Of course, sir. Is there something specific you're looking for?" "Patterns," he replied, watching her face for reactions. "My father always said the devil was in the details." Roman's office, Vincent's office until yesterday, felt more familiar now, like a suit that was finally tailored correctly. He'd spent countless hours here over the years, but always as the heir apparent. Now the weight of actual authority settled around him like armor. The personnel files revealed interesting details. Frank Torino had been requesting access to operational budgets outside his CFO purview. Sandra Walsh, head of human resources, had been making inquiries about executive insurance policies. David Chun, who ran the private security division, had been asking questions about the company's legal representation. Each individual request seemed reasonable in isolation. Together, they painted a picture of people positioning themselves for something significant. Maria returned with coffee and the morning's priority messages. Roman noticed she avoided mentioning his wife, though Ava usually called by this time to wish him luck on important days. The absence felt deliberate rather than accidental. "Has my wife called this morning?" "No, sir." "Should I reach out to Mrs. Castellano?" "That won't be necessary." Roman spent the next 2 hours reviewing the company's organizational structure with fresh eyes. Vincent had built layers of authority that prevented any single person from having complete operational knowledge. But Roman was discovering that several key players had been systematically expanding their access over the past 6 months. The pattern was subtle but clear. Someone had been preparing for a power vacuum, positioning loyal allies to control crucial aspects of the business when Vincent was no longer there to maintain oversight. Frank Torino knocked on his door at 10 a.m. sharp, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the expression of a man about to deliver difficult news. "Roman, we need to discuss some operational concerns that have come up." "What kind of concerns?" Frank settled into the chair across from Roman's desk, his movements careful and measured. "Several department heads have been expressing uncertainty about the transition. Nothing personal, you understand, but your father had very specific ways of handling certain aspects of the business. Meaning some of our more sensitive operations require a particular kind of oversight. Experience with the nuances involved." Frank's tone suggested he was trying to be diplomatic while delivering an ultimatum. Roman leaned back in his chair, studying the man who'd been his father's friend for 3 decades. "Frank, are you suggesting I'm not capable of running my own company?" "Not incapable, just inexperienced with certain complexities. Perhaps it would be wise to maintain the current operational structure while you learn the ropes." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, Frank carefully outlining a transition plan that would leave Roman with a CEO title but strip him of actual authority over key operations. It was a polite coup disguised as helpful guidance. "I'll consider your recommendations," Roman said finally, his tone giving no indication of his thoughts. Frank seemed satisfied with this response. "Take your time. These decisions shouldn't be rushed." After Frank left, Roman called David Shun to his office. The security division head was a former Marine who'd joined the company 5 years ago, bringing military precision to protecting company assets and personnel. Roman had always respected David's straightforward approach. "David, I need you to run background checks on several employees. Quietly, thoroughly, and with complete discretion." David's expression didn't change. "Any particular reason for concern?" "Call it due diligence. I want to understand who's been asking questions about operations outside their departments. Should I include family members in this review?" The question hung between them like a challenge. David knew exactly what he was asking, and his willingness to ask it suggested either complete loyalty or complete betrayal. "Include everyone," Roman said finally. "And David, this conversation never happened." "Understood." Lunchtime brought an unexpected visitor. Ava appeared in his office doorway with takeout from his favorite Italian restaurant, dressed in a way that suggested she'd put considerable thought into her appearance. "Thought you might be too busy to eat," she said, setting containers on his desk with practiced efficiency. "Thoughtful of you." Roman watched her movements, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders. "How was your morning?" "Productive. I had a meeting with the gallery's new investor, then lunch with Diana Morrison." She mentioned her sister casually, but Roman caught the significance. Diana worked for a competing real estate development firm. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes before Ava shifted to her real purpose. "Frank stopped by the house last night after you went to sleep. He seemed concerned about something." Roman kept his expression neutral. "What kind of concerns?" "He mentioned that some of the senior staff are worried about continuity. Apparently, there are aspects of the business that require specialized knowledge." Ava's choice of words echoed Frank's earlier conversation almost exactly. "And what do you think about these concerns?" Ava's smile was perfectly calibrated, supportive but slightly worried. "I think you're incredibly capable, but maybe there's wisdom in transitioning slowly. Your father built something remarkable, and preserving that legacy should be the priority." Roman finished his meal, while Ava outlined a vision of gradual transition that would keep him safely isolated from real operational control. Her argument was logical, well-rehearsed, and completely designed to neutralize him as a threat to whatever plan was already in motion. "I appreciate your perspective," he said when she finished. "Family support means everything during times like this." Ava's relief was visible. "I'm glad you see it that way. We're in this together, after all." After she left, Roman sat alone with the implications of what he'd just heard. His wife and his father's oldest friend were coordinating their approach, using identical language and arguments. The conspiracy against him was deeper and more organized than he'd initially suspected. Davidson returned at 4 p.m. with preliminary findings that confirmed Roman's worst fears. "Sir, the background checks revealed some interesting patterns. Several employees have been in regular contact with outside parties over the past 6 months. Financial records show unexplained deposits in personal accounts. Phone records indicate coordination that extends beyond normal business relationships. How many people are we talking about? At least 12 in positions of authority, possibly more. The pattern suggests a well-organized effort to undermine your succession." Roman absorbed this information without visible reaction. "And family members?" David's pause spoke volumes before he answered. "Mrs. Castellano has been meeting regularly with Tony Marchetti." The name hit Roman like a physical blow. Tony Marchetti was his cousin, Vincent's nephew, and someone who'd always believed he should inherit control of the family business. More importantly, Tony had been like a brother to Roman growing up. They'd shared secrets, dreams, and ambitions. How regularly? Weekly meetings for the past 3 months. Always in private locations, always using personal vehicles rather than company cars. Roman stared out the window at the city below, processing the magnitude of the betrayal. His wife and his cousin, the two people he'd trusted most completely, had been planning his downfall while he grieved his father's death and prepared to honor Vincent's legacy. "David, I need you to arrange comprehensive surveillance on everyone we've discussed. I want to know where they go, who they meet, what they say. Can you handle that without compromising operational security?" "Absolutely. Should I include contingency plans for if the situation escalates?" "What kind of contingencies?" David's military background showed in his tactical thinking. "Physical security for you and your assets. Isolation protocols for hostile actors. Neutralization strategies if necessary." Roman considered this for a long moment. Vincent had always said that business was war conducted by other means, but Roman was beginning to understand that sometimes war was simply war. "Prepare the contingencies, but don't implement anything without my direct authorization." "Understood, sir." As evening approached, Roman made a decision that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. He called his personal attorney, requesting an immediate review of all legal documents related to the company structure, his marriage, and his father's estate. The pieces were becoming clear. Ava and Tony had been preparing for Vincent's death, positioning themselves to manipulate Roman's inexperience and grief. They'd recruited allies within the company, promised benefits to those who supported their coup, and systematically undermined his authority before he'd even assumed it. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed Roman would react with emotion rather than calculation, that grief would make him vulnerable rather than focused. They'd never considered that Vincent's son might possess the same ruthless intelligence that had built the empire they were trying to steal. Roman left the office that evening with a new understanding of his position. He wasn't just inheriting a business. He was inheriting a war that had been planned and prepared during his father's final months. The enemy had taken the field, chosen their positions, and expected easy victory over an unprepared opponent. They were about to discover their mistake. The drive home took him through Queens, past neighborhoods where Vincent had first learned the rules of power and respect. Roman found himself thinking about those early lessons, understanding now why his father had been so insistent on teaching him that loyalty was earned through strength, never through weakness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations about the scope of the conspiracy against him. But tonight, Roman Castellano was no longer Vincent's grieving son. He was a man who'd inherited a crown of thorns and was prepared to wear it. The war for his empire was about to begin. Chapter 3. The Resignation Symphony. Roman entered his office the next morning to find 32 resignation letters arranged on his desk like a coordinated assault. Each envelope was identical. Expensive paper, formal letterhead, precise timing. The symbolism was unmistakable. His supposed allies had chosen this moment to abandon ship, leaving him isolated and presumably powerless. Maria Santos stood in the doorway, her face pale with what Roman now recognized as guilty knowledge. They were delivered by messenger service at 7 a.m., sir. All at once. Roman picked up the first letter, Frank Torino's resignation, effective immediately. The language was professionally respectful, but emotionally cold, citing philosophical differences regarding operational direction and concern for the company's future stability. Sandra Walsh from Human Resources had written 3 paragraphs explaining her difficult decision to pursue other opportunities. David Chin's letter was characteristically brief. Effective immediately, I am resigning my position as head of security. Best wishes for your future endeavors. One by one, Roman read through the carefully crafted betrayals. Department heads, senior managers, longtime family associates, all presenting identical reasoning for their sudden departure. The coordination was flawless, the timing devastating. But Roman felt no devastation. Instead, cold calculation settled over him like armor. His enemies had just revealed themselves completely, abandoning subtlety for dramatic effect. They'd expected shock, panic, desperate attempts to negotiate their return. Instead, they'd given him a comprehensive list of everyone who needed to be destroyed. Maria, cancel all my morning appointments and get my wife on the phone. Tell her I need to see her immediately. Should I try to reach any of the department heads? Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Roman interrupted. They've made their positions clear. Ava arrived within 30 minutes. Her expression carefully crafted to suggest concerned confusion. She wore a charcoal gray suit that made her look both professional and sympathetic. The perfect outfit for comforting a husband whose world was supposedly collapsing. Roman, what's happening? Maria said there was some kind of emergency. Roman gestured to the resignation letters spread across his desk. 32 resignations. All delivered this morning. All citing the same concerns about my leadership capabilities. Ava's performance was flawless. Shock, followed by outrage, followed by protective anger. That's outrageous. How dare they abandon you during such a difficult time? Interesting choice of words. Abandon suggests they were ever really with me to begin with. Roman watched his wife process this comment, seeing her recalibrate her approach in real time. What do you mean? I mean, this level of coordination doesn't happen overnight. This has been planned for months. He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. The question is whether you're as surprised as you're pretending to be. For just a moment, Ava's mask slipped. Roman saw calculation replace confusion, strategy override emotion. Then the performance resumed, but he'd seen enough. Roman, you're obviously under enormous stress. Maybe you should consider that some of these concerns might be legitimate. Your father had very specific relationships with these people. My father had very specific warnings about certain people. Ava's eyes sharpened. What kind of warnings? Roman stood and walked to the window, letting silence build between them. When he spoke, his voice carried a new edge. Not the grief-stricken son she'd been manipulating, but something harder and infinitely more dangerous. Ava, do you remember our second date? You asked me what I'd learned from my father about business. I told you he taught me that the most important skill in leadership was recognizing when people were lying to you. I remember. What does that have to do with? I'm very good at recognizing lies now. Roman turned to face her directly. And I've been lied to extensively by people I trusted completely. The silence stretched between them like a blade. Ava's composure held, but Roman could see her mind racing through options, assessing risks, preparing new strategies. If you have something to say to me, just say it. Roman smiled. Not the warm expression she was used to, but something cold and predatory. I'm saying that everyone who resigned today made a serious miscalculation. They assumed I'd be weak, that I'd panic, that I'd beg them to reconsider their decisions. And you won't. I don't negotiate with traitors. The word hung between them like a declaration of war. Ava's careful composure finally cracked, revealing the intelligence and calculation that had been hidden beneath years of performance. Roman, you're making a mistake. These people aren't your enemies. They're trying to protect something your father spent his life building. Maybe you should listen to their concerns instead of assuming conspiracy where none exists. Where's Tony? The question came without warning, catching Ava off guard. What? My cousin Tony. Where is he this morning? How would I know where Tony is? Roman opened his desk drawer and pulled out photographs David Chun had provided, images of Ava and Tony meeting in coffee shops, restaurants, parking garages. Months of secret meetings documented in stark black and white. Ava stared at the photos without speaking, her face cycling through emotions before settling on cold resignation. The performance was finally over. How long have you known? Does it matter? Roman spread the photos across his desk like playing cards. The question is whether you're going to continue lying or start explaining. Ava sat down heavily, her careful posture dissolving into something more genuine and infinitely more dangerous. Your father was 71 years old and running a business that required someone half his age. Tony has been handling most of the real operational decisions for the past 2 years. And you thought he should inherit instead of me. I thought the business should be run by someone who understood it completely. Ava's voice carried no apology, only pragmatic calculation. You've been kept away from the sensitive operations, Roman. You know the legitimate businesses, but you don't understand how everything really works. Roman felt pieces clicking into place. So you and Tony decided to stage a coup. We decided to prevent a disaster. Ava leaned forward, her intelligence finally visible without pretense. Roman, there are aspects of this business that could destroy you if handled incorrectly. People who could expose everything if they lost confidence in leadership. Tony knows how to manage those relationships. You don't. Yet, the word carried implications that made Ava pause. What do you mean? I mean that education can be acquired. Relationships can be rebuilt. Trust can be earned. Roman's smile was sharp as broken glass. But betrayal is permanent. Ava stood abruptly, her composure cracking further. Roman, if you're in charge of this company, we're out. All of us. The people who actually keep things running, who understand the real business, who have the connections that matter. You'll be left with an empty building and a pile of legal problems you can't handle. Perfect. The word came without hesitation, carrying such cold finality that Ava's face went pale. No way. Perfect, Roman repeated, standing to face his wife directly. Because now I know exactly who my enemies are, what they're planning, and how they've been positioning themselves. You just handed me a complete list of everyone who needs to be removed. Ava backed toward the door, finally understanding that her husband wasn't the grief-stricken heir she'd been manipulating. Roman, you don't understand what you're doing. These people have information that could what? Destroy me? Expose family secrets? Bring down everything my father built. Roman's laugh was without humor. Ava, do you think Vincent Castellano's son reached adulthood without learning how to handle dangerous people with dangerous information? You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting people who were already planning my destruction. Roman walked around his desk, advancing slowly. But that's a mistake I'll never make again. Ava fumbled for the door handle, her carefully planned coup dissolving into desperate retreat. This isn't over, Roman. You can't run this business alone. I won't be alone. I'll have loyal people around me. People who understand that betrayal has consequences. And what about us? What about our marriage? Roman's expression didn't change. Our marriage ended the moment you started planning with Tony. Everything since then has been theater. Ava left without another word, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Roman remained standing by his window, watching the city below and feeling the weight of absolute clarity. His enemies had revealed themselves completely, abandoning subtlety for what they'd assumed would be a decisive strike. They'd expected panic, negotiation, desperate attempts to maintain relationships that had been poisoned months ago. Instead, they'd freed him from any obligation to show mercy. Roman returned to his desk and began making phone calls. Not to the people who'd resigned. They were already dead to him. Instead, he called contact his father had made over 30 years of careful relationship building. Lawyers, accountants, investigators, security specialists. People who understood that loyalty was rewarded and betrayal was punished. By noon, Roman had assembled a team of professionals who owed their primary allegiance to Vincent Castellano's memory and his son's future. By evening, he would have comprehensive intelligence on every aspect of the conspiracy against him. And by tomorrow, the war for his empire would begin in earnest. Maria Santos appeared in his doorway as afternoon shadows lengthened across the office. "Mr. Castellano, should I prepare termination paperwork for the employees who resigned?" "No need, Maria. They've already terminated themselves." Roman looked up from the strategic notes he'd been making. "But I do need you to prepare new contracts for their replacements. We're going to rebuild this company with people who understand loyalty and the operational issues they mentioned, the sensitive aspects of the business." Roman's smile was cold as winter. "Those will be handled by people who understand that some lessons are only learned once." The resignation symphony had played its final note. Now it was time for Roman Castellano to compose a very different kind of music, one that would teach his enemies exactly what happened to those who mistook grief for weakness. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Education. Roman spent his first week alone in the building like a detective studying a crime scene. With the mass exodus of senior staff, he had unprecedented access to offices, files, and systems that had previously been compartmentalized. What he discovered painted a picture of systematic preparation for his father's death that went back nearly a year. Frank Torino's office yielded the most damning evidence. Hidden in a locked filing cabinet that Roman opened with his master key were detailed financial projections showing how the company would be restructured under Tony's leadership. Revenue streams Roman had never heard of, client relationships he'd been kept away from, operational procedures that painted his supposed inheritance as merely the legitimate front for something much larger and more complex. Vincent's empire wasn't just construction and waste management. It was a carefully orchestrated network of services that operated in the spaces between legal and illegal, providing solutions for people who couldn't solve problems through conventional means. Private security that occasionally became private enforcement. Real estate development that sometimes required convincing reluctant sellers. Waste management that disposed of more than just garbage. Roman had always known his father's business existed in gray areas, but the scope of operations revealed in these files was staggering. Vincent had built an organization that served as the infrastructure for half the questionable business dealings in 3 states. And Roman had been deliberately kept ignorant of all of it. Sandra Walsh's computer contained correspondence with employment agencies, showing she'd been recruiting Tony's people to replace key personnel months before Vincent's death. David Chin's security files revealed surveillance reports on Roman himself, his movements, his relationships, his potential vulnerabilities documented with clinical precision. But the most devastating discovery came in Ava's personal effects, which she'd left behind in her hurried departure. Hidden in her designer handbag was a burner phone containing text messages that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Roman suspects something. We may need to accelerate the timeline. Ava to Tony, dated 2 days after Vincent's funeral. Frank is nervous about the financial transitions. Make sure he understands his position is secure under new management. Tony to Ava, 3 days ago. Once the resignations are submitted, we'll have 48 hours to consolidate control before he can mount any serious response. Ava to Tony, yesterday morning. Roman sat in his father's chair, reading through months of messages that chronicled his wife's systematic betrayal. The planning had been meticulous, the timeline carefully calibrated, the execution flawless, except for one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed he would react like the sheltered heir they'd kept him as, rather than the predator his father had actually raised. His education in the family business had been deliberate but incomplete. Vincent had taught him legitimate operations, financial management, personnel leadership, strategic thinking, all the skills necessary to run the company's public face. But the deeper operations, the sensitive relationships, the true sources of power had been kept from him until he was ready. Vincent's death had simply come before that education was complete. But Roman was a fast learner, and his enemies had inadvertently provided him with a comprehensive curriculum. He spent 3 days studying every file, every record, every piece of correspondence he could find. Names of clients who required discreet services. Lists of public officials who received monthly consulting fees for unspecified services. Detailed records of problems solved and debts collected through methods that never appeared in official reports. By Thursday, Roman understood exactly what his father had built and how it operated. By Friday, he was ready to begin taking back. His first call was to Albert Morrison, a man whose name appeared frequently in Vincent's private files, but whom Roman had never met. Morrison answered on the second ring with a voice that suggested he'd been expecting this conversation. Roman Castellano, I've been wondering when you'd call. Mr. Morrison, I believe we need to discuss some business arrangements that were interrupted by recent personnel changes. I heard about the resignations. Unfortunate timing. Morrison's tone suggested he understood exactly what those resignations represented. Perhaps we should meet in person. There are matters that require delicate handling. They arranged to meet that evening at a restaurant Morrison specified, an establishment that Roman recognized from his father's private calendar. When he arrived, Morrison was already seated in a back booth that provided privacy and clear sight lines to all entrances. Albert Morrison was 70 years old, distinguished, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to wielding power from behind the scenes. His handshake was firm, his eyes calculating, his manner suggesting this was an interview as much as a business meeting. Your father and I worked together for 25 years. Morrison began without preamble. He solved problems for people who couldn't solve them through conventional means. The question is whether you understand what that really meant. I'm learning. Learning isn't enough in this business. Understanding is essential, but commitment is everything. Morrison leaned forward. Roman, the services your father provided required absolute discretion, complete reliability, and the kind of judgment that comes from understanding consequences. Can you provide those qualities? Roman met the older man's gaze directly. Mr. Morrison, my father's death was the beginning of a carefully planned coup designed to strip me of everything he built. The people who organized that coup made one crucial error. They assumed I'd react with weakness rather than strength. I'm here because I intend to prove them wrong. Morrison smiled for the first time. Good. Because the alternative to working with you is working with Tony Marchetti, and that boy has always confused ambition with capability. Over the next 2 hours, Morrison outlined a network of relationships that Vincent had spent decades building. Judges who owed favors for problems quietly resolved. Politicians who'd received campaign contributions in exchange for regulatory flexibility. Business leaders who needed assistance with competitors or unions or legal complications that couldn't be addressed through normal channels. Your father never left evidence, never made threats, never did anything that could be traced back to official business. But when people needed certain kinds of problems to disappear, they came to Vincent, and he delivered results. What kind of problems? The kind that end careers, destroy reputations, or send people to prison if they're not handled correctly. Morrison's expression was serious. Roman, are you prepared to inherit that level of responsibility? Roman thought about Ava's betrayal, Tony's coup, the systematic dismantling of everything Vincent had built. He thought about 32 resignations designed to leave him powerless and isolated. He thought about years of being kept from understanding his own heritage. Mr. Morrison, I'm prepared to inherit everything my father built, and I'm prepared to use it. Then we should discuss your immediate problems. Tony has been reaching out to our mutual contacts, suggesting that the transition wasn't as smooth as originally planned. He's positioning himself as the more experienced alternative. And what do you think of his position? Morrison's laugh was cold. I think Tony Marchetti is an ambitious child who never understood that this business is built on trust, earned over decades. He assumes he can inherit Vincent's relationships through intimidation and promises he's not equipped to keep. Meaning he's already made mistakes that are going to cost him dearly. And you're going to help me ensure those costs are extracted properly. Roman felt pieces clicking into place. What kind of mistakes? The kind that happen when someone tries to manage sensitive operations without understanding the full scope of what's involved. Morrison leaned back. Tony has been promising continuity to clients while fundamentally misunderstanding how their problems were actually solved. He's created vulnerabilities that your father would never have allowed. Over the next hour, Morrison detailed a situation that was spiraling beyond Tony's control. A federal judge who'd received assistance with a gambling problem was now being pressured for favorable rulings. A city councilman who needed help with a DUI was being asked to approve contracts he couldn't legally support. A construction company owner who'd required labor negotiation assistance was being pushed to accept terms that would expose the entire operation. Tony believes that fear is the only tool necessary for control. He never learned that sustainable power comes from being indispensable rather than threatening. And these clients are becoming nervous. These clients are becoming desperate, and desperate people make terrible decisions that expose everyone involved. Morrison's expression grew serious. Roman, within 2 weeks, Tony's approach is going to create a crisis that could bring down everything your father built. Unless someone intervenes. Roman understood the opportunity being presented. What kind of intervention? The kind that demonstrates you understand how this business really works. The kind that shows these clients why Vincent Castellano's son is someone they should trust. Morrison smiled. The kind that ensures Tony Marchetti learns the cost of overreaching. They spent another hour discussing specifics, names, dates, leverage points, and strategic approaches. Morrison provided Roman with contact information for Vincent's key clients, along with detailed briefs on their situations and needs. Your father always said that information was the most valuable currency in any negotiation. He collected it carefully, used it sparingly, and never wasted it on personal vendettas. Morrison stood to leave, but he also said that betrayal required consequences severe enough to deter future betrayals. And what kind of consequences did he have in mind? Morrison's smile was sharp as broken glass, the kind that ensure his enemies never forget the lesson. Roman left the restaurant with a comprehensive understanding of both opportunity and responsibility. His enemies had assumed that stripping away the company's senior leadership would leave him powerless. Instead, they'd given him direct access to the true sources of power his father had spent decades cultivating. Tony was overplaying his hand, Ava was overestimating her importance, and Frank was discovering that financial knowledge without operational understanding was worthless. But Roman now had both. The drive home took him through neighborhoods where Vincent had first learned the rules of power and consequence. Roman found himself thinking about those early lessons, understanding now why his father had been so insistent on teaching him that respect was earned through results, not promises. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of his real education in family business. But tonight, Roman Castellano was no longer the sheltered heir his enemies had underestimated. He was a man who'd inherited both an empire and the knowledge to use it. The hunter had become the hunted. Now it was time to reverse those roles permanently. Chapter 5. The Web Unravels. Roman's new understanding of the family business transformed his perspective completely. What had seemed like devastating betrayal now appeared as strategic opportunity. His enemies had isolated themselves from their power base, while providing him with complete intelligence on their plans and capabilities. The key was patient execution rather than emotional reaction. Monday morning brought Roman's first test of his expanded knowledge. Judge Harrison Blackwell called the private number Morrison had provided, his voice tight with anxiety that suggested Tony's inexperience was already creating problems. I need to speak with Vincent's successor about a sensitive matter that's becoming complicated. This is Roman Castellano. What can I do for you, Your Honor? There's a situation developing that requires the kind of careful handling your father specialized in. Unfortunately, the person who's been representing your organization lately doesn't seem to understand the nuances involved. Roman had studied Judge Blackwell's file over the weekend. Vincent had helped resolve a gambling problem that could have destroyed the judge's career, accepting Blackwell's gratitude in the form of favorable consideration for certain legal matters affecting family business. It was a relationship built on mutual benefit rather than coercion. I understand Tony has been overzealous in his approach. Overzealous is generous. He's demanding rulings that would expose both of us to federal investigation. Your father never asked for anything that would compromise my position. He understood that protecting his assets meant protecting mine. Roman made careful notes, while Blackwell explained the pressure campaign Tony had initiated. Where Vincent had requested occasional favorable scheduling or procedural considerations, Tony was demanding dismissals of serious charges and suppression of evidence that would obviously trigger investigative scrutiny. Your Honor, I apologize for any inappropriate pressure you've received. That approach doesn't reflect our organization's values or strategic thinking. Then you'll call off your cousin? I'll handle the situation personally. And Your Honor, moving forward, any request for assistance will be reasonable, strategic, and mutually beneficial. You have my word. The relief in Blackwell's voice was obvious. Thank you. Your father was a man who understood long-term thinking. I hope you've inherited that perspective. Roman's second call came from City Councilman Paul Hendricks, who'd received Vincent's help with a DUI that could have ended his political career. Tony had been demanding approval for construction contracts that violated multiple city regulations. Kid doesn't understand that some favors cost more than they're worth, Hendricks explained. Vincent knew the difference between influence and exposure. This Tony character seems to think fear is the only tool that matters. By noon, Roman had received similar calls from 6 different contacts. The pattern was consistent. Tony was burning through political capital Vincent had spent years accumulating, demanding immediate returns that would expose the entire network to law enforcement scrutiny. He's acting like a mob enforcer rather than a business strategist, Morrison explained when Roman called to update him. Vincent's approach was surgical. Tony's is sledgehammer, and sledgehammers leave evidence. How long before this creates serious legal problems? FBI opens investigations when patterns become obvious. Tony's demands are creating a pattern that will be visible within weeks. Roman understood the opportunity this created. Tony's aggressive approach was alienating the political network that formed the foundation of family power. If Roman could demonstrate a more sophisticated understanding of these relationships, he could rebuild loyalty while positioning Tony for catastrophic failure. Albert, I need to meet with each of these contacts personally. Face-to-face reassurance that the organization understands long-term strategic thinking. Dangerous territory. If you're seen meeting with judges and politicians so soon after taking control, it could raise questions. Not if the meetings are social rather than business. Vincent attended charity events, political fundraisers, cultural occasions. Natural opportunities for brief conversations that wouldn't attract attention. Morrison's approval was evident in his tone. Your father's son, after all. There's a fundraiser Thursday evening for the Children's Hospital. Half the city council will be there, plus 3 judges and 2 state senators. Roman spent the next 3 days preparing for what amounted to his debut in his father's shadow world. Morrison provided detailed briefs on each contact, their personalities, interests, family situations, and preferred approaches to sensitive conversations. Roman studied the information with the intensity he'd once applied to legitimate business negotiations. Thursday evening's fundraiser was held at the Plaza Hotel, 500 guests in formal attire supporting pediatric cancer research. Roman arrived fashionably late, allowing him to survey the room and identify key targets before beginning his careful campaign of relationship rebuilding. Judge Blackwell was near the silent auction displays, examining vacation packages with his wife. Roman approached with practiced casualness, purchasing a bid on a weekend in the Hamptons that happened to be adjacent to items the judge was considering. Beautiful evening for a good cause, Roman commented, his tone suggesting polite social conversation rather than business discussion. Indeed, your father was always generous with charitable contributions. Blackwell's response carried layers of meaning. acknowledgement of Vincent's civic involvement, and appreciation for his discreet approach to relationship management. He taught me that community support creates connections that benefit everyone involved. Roman's careful phrasing suggested understanding without explicit acknowledgement of their business relationship. They spent 5 minutes discussing the hospital's needs and the importance of pediatric research. But Blackwell's relaxed demeanor when they parted indicated that Roman had successfully communicated his intention to honor his father's sophisticated approach to political relationships. Similar conversations with Councilman Hendricks, State Senator Patricia Walsh, and 3 other contacts followed throughout the evening. Each interaction was brief, social, and designed to demonstrate that Roman understood the subtle protocols Vincent had established. The key message was consistent. Unlike Tony's aggressive demands, Roman would honor the mutually beneficial relationships his father had built. But the evening's most important encounter was completely unexpected. Roman was leaving the men's room when he nearly collided with Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos, his assistant sister, and someone whose name had appeared frequently in Vincent's private files without explanation. The family resemblance was obvious once Roman knew to look for it. "Mr. Castellano, I heard about your recent leadership transition. Detective Santos, I wasn't aware you knew my family's business." Maria Santos studied him with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Your father and I had occasional conversations about matters of mutual interest. Professional courtesy between people who understood the importance of community stability." Roman felt pieces clicking into place. Vincent had cultivated relationships within law enforcement just as carefully as he'd built political connections. Detective Santos wasn't just his assistant sister. She was an intelligence source and early warning system for potential legal problems. "I hope those conversations can continue under new management." "That depends on whether new management understands the delicate balance your father maintained." Santos's tone carried subtle warning. Some people believe that authority comes from intimidation rather than cooperation. Those people create problems for everyone involved, including law enforcement, especially law enforcement. When someone starts making noise that attracts federal attention, everyone in the area becomes a potential target. Santos glanced around the crowded ballroom. "Your cousin has been making a lot of noise lately." Roman understood the warning and the opportunity. "Detective, I believe in the same community-focused approach my father practiced. Stability benefits everyone, and instability threatens everyone." "Good to hear, because instability sometimes requires intervention from people who prefer stability." The implication was clear. If Tony's reckless approach created federal heat, Detective Santos would be forced to take protective action that could include targeting anyone associated with family business. "I appreciate the heads up. Just friendly advice between community members who want the same things." Roman left the fundraiser with a comprehensive understanding of both the opportunities and dangers facing him. Tony's aggressive approach was creating a window for Roman to rebuild damaged relationships, while positioning his cousin for spectacular failure. But that window was limited. If Tony's recklessness triggered federal investigation, everyone connected to family business would become potential targets. The drive home took him past the construction sites where Vincent had first built legitimate business to support less visible operations. Roman found himself thinking about the careful balance his father had maintained, understanding now why Vincent had been so insistent on teaching him patience and strategic thinking. Roman's education in the shadow world was accelerating, but his real test would come when he moved from rebuilding relationships to actively destroying his enemies. The network Vincent had built would support him, but only if he proved worthy of the trust his father had earned through decades of careful relationship management. The web of conspiracy against him was unraveling, but Roman needed to ensure that when it collapsed completely, his enemies were trapped in the wreckage. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of his campaign, turning Tony's alienated allies against him while positioning himself as the only alternative to catastrophic exposure. The hunter was becoming the predator, and predators required both patience and precision to ensure their prey never escaped. Chapter 6: The Predator's Patience. Roman's strategy crystallized during a sleepless Tuesday night spent studying surveillance reports David Chun had provided before his resignation. Chen's betrayal stung more than the others because Roman had genuinely respected the man's military professionalism. But betrayal often came wrapped in the most convincing packages. The reports revealed that Tony's operation was even more disorganized than Morrison had suggested. His cousin was operating from a warehouse in Queens, surrounded by men whose loyalty had been purchased rather than earned. The surveillance showed a pattern of meetings with increasingly desperate clients, aggressive confrontations with reluctant allies, and strategic mistakes that painted Tony as someone playing far above his understanding. But the most valuable intelligence came from financial records that Chun had apparently copied before his departure. Tony was hemorrhaging money, paying inflated salaries to maintain loyalty while taking on operational costs Vincent had always avoided through careful relationship management. More importantly, Tony was using family business accounts to fund his shadow operation, accounts that Roman, as legitimate CEO, could freeze with a single phone call. Roman made that call Wednesday morning. "Frank, I need to discuss some irregularities in our financial systems." Frank Torino's voice carried the weary resignation of a man who'd gambled everything on the wrong horse. "What kind of irregularities?" "Unauthorized access to operational accounts, withdrawals that weren't approved through proper channels, the kind of financial mismanagement that could expose the company to regulatory scrutiny." Frank's pause was telling. "Roman, perhaps we should meet to discuss this situation properly." "I don't think so, Frank. I think you should consider whether continuing to provide financial support for unauthorized operations is worth risking federal banking violations." The threat was subtle but clear. Roman knew about the money trail and was prepared to use it. Frank's response confirmed that Tony's financial position was more precarious than anyone realized. "The accounts will be secured immediately." "Good. And Frank, my father always said that loyalty was demonstrated through actions, not words. I hope you'll consider that perspective when making future decisions." Roman's next call was to Albert Morrison, who'd been monitoring Tony's deteriorating relationships with increasing satisfaction. "Your cousin just lost his primary funding source. How long before that creates operational problems?" "Days, not weeks. He's been paying people premium rates to maintain loyalty. Without access to family accounts, he'll need to find alternative funding or start losing personnel." "And where would he look for alternative funding?" Morrison's pause suggested he was considering implications Roman had already calculated. "That depends on how desperate he becomes, and how poor his judgment proves to be." Roman understood. Men under financial pressure made decisions they'd never consider under normal circumstances, and Tony's judgment had already proven questionable. "Albert, I need you to arrange a meeting with someone who's been causing Tony particular problems. Someone whose situation demonstrates the difference between my approach and his." "Judge Blackwell." "Perfect." They met Friday evening at Morrison's private club, a discreet establishment that had served powerful men for over a century. Judge Blackwell arrived precisely on time, his manner suggesting this was a conversation he'd been anticipating. "Your Honor, thank you for taking the time to discuss this delicate situation." "Mr. Castellano, I'll be direct. Your cousin's approach is creating problems that could destroy both our positions. Either this situation gets resolved quickly, or I'll be forced to distance myself from your family entirely." Roman had prepared for this moment carefully, studying Vincent's files on Blackwell and understanding exactly what the judge needed to hear. "Your Honor, my father's approach was built on mutual benefit and long-term strategic thinking. He understood that sustainable relationships require protecting all parties involved." Roman leaned forward. "Tony's approach reflects inexperience and poor judgment. I intend to correct both problems." "How?" "By demonstrating that Vincent's son understands his father's principles." Roman placed a thin folder on the table between them. "Your Honor, the gambling situation that originally brought you into our orbit has been completely resolved. There are no outstanding debts, no ongoing obligations, no continuing vulnerabilities." Blackwell opened the folder to find documentation proving that his gambling debts had been quietly eliminated, not just covered, but erased from the books of every creditor involved. Your father never mentioned this resolution because he understood that true power comes from solving problems completely rather than using them as leverage. Roman's tone carried Vincent's measured authority. Your Honor, our family doesn't collect judges as assets. We build relationships with people who share our commitment to community stability. Blackwell studied the documents with obvious relief. And what about your cousin's demands? What demands? As far as I'm concerned, you don't owe our family anything beyond the professional courtesy one community leader shows another. The judge's expression transformed from anxious calculation to genuine appreciation. Your father's son indeed. However, Roman continued, his tone sharpening slightly, Tony's reckless behavior has created a situation that threatens everyone involved. I need your help to resolve that situation permanently. What kind of help? Roman placed a second folder on the table. Tony has been making financial demands that violate both banking regulations and federal racketeering statutes. If someone were to file a formal complaint about systematic extortion attempts, Blackwell examined the documents, carefully recorded evidence of Tony's threats and demands, presented in language that would be immediately recognizable to federal prosecutors. This is enough to trigger a RICO investigation, which would expose everyone involved, including people who've done nothing wrong. Roman's expression was serious. Unless the investigation could be narrowly focused on specific individuals who've been operating outside established protocols. The judge understood immediately. A federal investigation that targeted Tony specifically, rather than the entire network, would eliminate Roman's primary competitor while protecting the relationships Vincent had built. This would require careful coordination with federal authorities. I have reason to believe federal authorities are already interested in Tony's activities. Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos mentioned that his aggressive approach was attracting unwanted attention. Maria Santos is a good cop. If she's concerned about community stability, that's significant. Blackwell closed both folders. What timeline are we discussing? Tony's financial resources have been significantly reduced as of this morning. Desperation leads to increasingly poor judgment. I expect he'll make mistakes within days that will provide the evidence necessary for formal charges. And you're certain this approach will protect the broader network? Roman's smile carried Vincent's cold calculation. Your Honor, my father spent 30 years building relationships based on mutual benefit and strategic thinking. I intend to honor that legacy while removing people who threaten it. They spent another hour discussing details, timing, evidence requirements, protective measures for legitimate business operations. When Judge Blackwell left, Roman felt the satisfaction of a plan clicking into perfect alignment. Tony's aggression had alienated political allies, his financial pressures were mounting, and his operational security was compromised by inexperience. Now federal law enforcement would be watching for the mistakes that desperation would inevitably produce. But Roman's campaign wasn't complete without addressing the personal betrayals that had made this war necessary. Saturday morning brought a call from Ava's divorce attorney, a predictable development that Roman had been preparing for since discovering her conspiracy with Tony. Mr. Castellano, my client, is prepared to discuss an equitable division of assets acquired during your marriage. Your client is prepared to negotiate her surrender terms, you mean? The attorney's pause suggested Ava hadn't been entirely forthcoming about the circumstances of their separation. Perhaps we could meet to discuss this situation more completely. That won't be necessary. Ava chose to abandon our marriage in favor of a conspiracy with my cousin. She's welcome to whatever assets she brought into the relationship, but she won't be taking anything that belongs to my family. Mr. Castellano, New York is an equitable distribution state. Your wife is entitled to. My wife is entitled to whatever a federal judge decides she's entitled to after reviewing evidence of her systematic betrayal of spousal privilege and conspiracy to defraud family business assets. Roman had spent weeks preparing for this conversation, assembling documentation that would make Ava's divorce demands impossible to pursue without exposing her to serious criminal charges. I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. Your client participated in conspiracy, wire fraud, and attempted extortion. If she wants to pursue divorce proceedings, she's welcome to explain those activities to a federal magistrate. The attorney ended the call without further discussion. Within hours, Roman received a text from Ava's personal phone. "We need to talk." His response was immediate. "No, we don't." By Sunday evening, Roman had successfully isolated Tony financially, positioned him for federal investigation, and neutralized Ava's ability to claim any portion of family assets. The network of relationships Vincent had built was being carefully restored under Roman's leadership, while his enemies found themselves trapped in consequences of their own creation. But the campaign's final phase would require moving beyond defensive strategy to active elimination of threats. Tony's desperation was predictable, but desperate men were often most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. Roman spent Sunday night in his father's study, surrounded by Vincent's private files and strategic notes. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of the end for his enemies, but victory required ensuring they never had opportunity for revenge or recovery. The predator had shown patience. Now it was time to demonstrate precision. Chapter 7. The First Strike. Monday morning brought news that confirmed Roman's strategic assessment. Tony had attempted to rob a legitimate family business account and triggered automatic federal banking alerts. The desperation Roman had predicted was manifesting exactly as planned, but faster than even he had anticipated. Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos called Roman's private line at 8 a.m., her voice carrying the professional efficiency of someone delivering expected intelligence. "Your cousin made some poor decisions over the weekend. Federal banking investigators are now involved in what started as a simple accounting irregularity. How unfortunate for Tony. How fortunate for people who prefer stable community relationships." Santos's tone suggested this conversation was being recorded for protective purposes. "Mr. Castellano, federal investigations have a way of expanding beyond their original scope. Community leaders who demonstrate cooperation and transparency tend to avoid complications. I appreciate the guidance, Detective. Cooperation with legitimate law enforcement has always been our family's policy." "Good to hear. There may be opportunities to demonstrate that cooperation in coming days." Roman understood. Federal investigators would want to understand the scope of Tony's unauthorized activities, which would require testimony from legitimate business leaders who'd been injured by his criminal behavior. His second call came from Albert Morrison, whose intelligence network had been monitoring federal activity since Tony's banking violation had triggered automatic alerts. "It's moving faster than we anticipated. FBI Financial Crimes Unit opened a formal investigation this morning. They'll want to interview anyone with knowledge of unauthorized account access." And what should those interviews reveal? That Anthony Marchetti has been systematically violating federal banking regulations while claiming to represent family business interests. That his activities were unauthorized, illegal, and conducted without knowledge or approval of legitimate leadership. Roman felt pieces clicking into place with mechanical precision. "Albert, I need you to arrange a meeting with whoever's running the federal investigation. I want to demonstrate voluntary cooperation before they start making formal requests." Dangerous territory. Once you start talking to federal agents, every word gets scrutinized. Not if you're providing information rather than defending against allegations. Roman's tone carried Vincent's calculated confidence. "I'm not a target of their investigation. I'm a victim of Tony's criminal activities." By noon, Morrison had arranged a meeting with Special Agent Catherine Williams, who was leading the federal financial crimes investigation. Williams agreed to meet at Morrison's law office, suggesting she understood the delicate nature of the situation. Agent Williams was 45 years old, 15 years with the Bureau, and possessed the kind of analytical intelligence that had built a successful career investigating complex financial conspiracies. She arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio and the confident manner of someone who'd conducted hundreds of similar interviews. "Mr. Castellano, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. As you know, we're investigating potential banking violations involving accounts associated with your company." Agent Williams, I'm grateful for the opportunity to clarify the situation. My cousin's unauthorized activities have created serious problems for our legitimate business operations. Williams opened her portfolio and consulted notes that suggested she'd already conducted extensive preliminary investigation. Can you walk me through the account structure and authorization protocols for your company's financial systems? Roman spent 30 minutes providing detailed information about legitimate business operations, account access procedures, and internal controls Vincent had established to prevent unauthorized transactions. He demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of proper protocols while making clear that Tony's activities had violated every established safeguard. Agent Williams, when I discovered unauthorized access to company accounts, I immediately secured the systems and began internal investigation. That's when I learned the scope of my cousin's criminal activities. What kind of activities? Roman provided carefully documented evidence of Tony's unauthorized withdrawals, systematic account manipulation, and attempts to forge authorization documents. The evidence painted a picture of escalating financial crimes that had accelerated after Vincent's death. Mr. Castellano, these documents suggest your cousin was planning some kind of financial takeover of family business assets. Agent Williams, my cousin was attempting systematic theft while claiming to represent family interests. He used his position of trust to commit crimes that have severely damaged our company's reputation and operational capability. Williams reviewed the documents with obvious professional interest. This level of documentation suggests you've been investigating the situation for some time. Since the day I discovered unauthorized account activity. My father built this company through legitimate business practices and careful financial management. I won't allow criminal behavior to destroy that legacy. And you're prepared to testify about these findings? Absolutely. Corporate integrity requires cooperation with law enforcement when crimes are discovered. The interview continued for another hour, Williams asking detailed questions about Tony's access to company systems, his relationships with other employees, and the timeline of his unauthorized activities. Roman answered every question completely, providing information that positioned Tony as a criminal acting without authority while demonstrating his own commitment to legitimate business practices. Mr. Castellano, is there anything else you think we should know about this situation? Roman placed a final folder on the table. Agent Williams, I believe my cousin's criminal activities extend beyond simple banking violations. These documents suggest he may have been using company resources to fund illegal operations. Williams examined documentation showing Tony's payments to individuals with serious criminal records, his rental of properties associated with money laundering, and his meetings with known federal targets. The evidence suggested a pattern of criminal activity that extended far beyond unauthorized account access. This is very helpful information. We'll need to investigate these connections thoroughly. Of course. And Agent Williams? If additional evidence comes to light, you'll be contacted immediately. Our family has always believed that cooperation with law enforcement protects legitimate business interests. When Williams left, Roman felt the satisfaction of a plan executing with mechanical precision. Tony's desperation had led him to commit federal crimes that would now trigger comprehensive investigation of his entire operation. The evidence Roman had provided would ensure that investigation focused on Tony's criminal activities rather than legitimate family business. But the afternoon brought an unexpected complication. Ava appeared at Roman's office without announcement, bypassing security through methods that suggested she still maintained allies within the building. She entered his office like she belonged there, her confidence suggesting she believed their relationship provided leverage Roman couldn't ignore. Roman, we need to discuss this situation before it gets completely out of hand. No, we don't. And your presence here demonstrates poor judgment that could be interpreted as criminal trespass. Ava's composure faltered slightly, but she pressed forward with the desperate calculation of someone whose options were rapidly disappearing. Roman, Tony's situation affects both of us. If federal investigators start examining family business operations, everyone gets exposed. Everyone who is involved in criminal activities gets exposed. People who maintained legitimate business practices have nothing to worry about. You think you can just throw Tony to the federal prosecutors and walk away clean? Ava's voice carried the edge of panic. Roman, he knows things about family operations that could implicate everyone. Roman leaned back in his chair, studying his wife with the cold assessment he'd learned from watching Vincent evaluate potential threats. Ava, what exactly do you think Tony knows? He knows about the real business. The services your father provided, the relationships he maintained, the ways problems got solved when legal channels weren't sufficient. And what makes you think federal investigators care about historical business practices when they have comprehensive evidence of current criminal activities? Ava's face went pale as she realized the implications of Roman's question. You set him up. I provided federal investigators with evidence of crimes Tony actually committed. His desperation led him to violate federal banking regulations while attempting to steal company assets. Those aren't fabricated charges. They're documented criminal activities. But the timing was determined by Tony's poor judgment and financial desperation. I simply ensured that when he made inevitable mistakes, appropriate authorities would be notified. Ava stared at him with growing horror as she understood the scope of what Roman had orchestrated. You destroyed him. I protected legitimate family business interests from criminal attack. Tony destroyed himself through greed and inexperience. And what about me? Roman's smile was cold as winter. What about you? You chose to conspire against your husband in favor of a criminal enterprise. Those choices have consequences. Roman, I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can rebuild. No, we can't. Roman stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city where Vincent had built an empire through careful relationship management and strategic thinking. Ava, our marriage ended the moment you started planning with Tony. Everything since then has been theater. I want to make this right. Then you should leave New York. Permanently. Before federal investigators decide your involvement in Tony's criminal activities warrants closer examination. Ava left without another word. Her confident entrance transformed into desperate retreat. Roman watched her go with the satisfaction of a problem finally resolved. By evening, reports from Morrison's intelligence network confirmed that Tony's operation was collapsing. Key personnel were abandoning the warehouse headquarters, federal surveillance teams were monitoring known associates, and Tony himself had disappeared, probably seeking help from contacts who were now more liability than asset. The first strike had achieved every strategic objective. Tony was isolated, financially ruined, and under federal investigation for crimes that would ensure lengthy prison sentences. Ava was neutralized and preparing to flee rather than face potential prosecution. The political network Vincent had built was being carefully restored under Roman's more sophisticated leadership. But Roman understood that wounded enemies were often more dangerous than confident ones. Tony's desperation would lead to increasingly reckless decisions, and desperate men sometimes chose to destroy what they couldn't control. The campaign's next phase would require ensuring that Tony's inevitable final mistakes were contained and directed toward his own destruction rather than broader damage to family interests. The predator had drawn first blood. Now it was time to ensure the prey couldn't escape or retaliate. Chapter 8: The Noose Tightens. Tuesday morning brought confirmation that Tony's situation was deteriorating faster than even Roman had anticipated. Federal surveillance teams had tracked his cousin to a rundown motel in Newark, where he was apparently attempting to coordinate some kind of desperate response to his collapsing empire. But desperation made men unpredictable, and unpredictable men posed risks that required careful management. Roman's first call came from Detective Santos, whose voice carried the urgency of someone dealing with an escalating situation. Your cousin contacted several known criminals overnight. The kind of people who solve problems through violence rather than negotiation. How much of a threat are we discussing? The kind that could create collateral damage if not handled properly. Roman, desperate men with criminal connections sometimes choose to settle scores rather than accept defeat. Roman understood the warning. Tony's connection to violent criminals meant his final moves might target Roman personally rather than limiting themselves to business competition. Detective, What kind of protective measures would you recommend? The kind that demonstrate community leaders take threats seriously while cooperating fully with law enforcement response. Translation: increase personal security while ensuring any violence could be traced directly to Tony's criminal associations rather than legitimate family business. Roman's second call was to Morrison, whose legal expertise would be crucial for navigating the increasingly complex situation. Albert, Tony's desperation is creating potential complications. I need comprehensive legal protection and strategic guidance for managing violent threats. How violent are we talking? The kind that might require physical response rather than legal maneuvering. Morrison's pause suggested he was calculating risks and opportunities with the same analytical precision Vincent had taught Roman to apply to strategic problems. Roman, there are protocols for handling threats from criminal organizations. Legal protocols that protect legitimate business leaders while ensuring appropriate law enforcement response. What kind of protocols? The kind that document threats comprehensively, coordinate with appropriate authorities, and prepare defensive measures that can be completely justified to any later investigation. They spent an hour discussing personal security arrangements, legal documentation requirements, and communication protocols with law enforcement. Morrison's approach was methodical and thorough, designed to ensure Roman's safety while maintaining his position as a legitimate business leader defending against criminal attack. But Roman's most important conversation that morning was with someone he'd never expected to become an ally. David Chun called Roman's private line at 11 a.m., his voice carrying the professional efficiency that had made him valuable before his betrayal. Roman, I need to discuss Tony's current activities. The situation has developed beyond what any of us anticipated. David, you resigned from family employment to join Tony's operation. Why would I discuss anything with you? Because Tony's planning something that could get people killed, including you. Roman felt ice forming in his veins. Explain. Tony hired 3 men from a crew in Brooklyn, professional criminals with experience in targeted violence. He's paying them to send a message about challenging his authority. What kind of message? The permanent kind. Roman, he's lost perspective completely. He believes killing you will consolidate his control over family operations. Roman processed this information with the analytical calm Vincent had drilled into him during countless strategic discussions. Tony's desperation had led him to cross the line from financial crime to planned murder, a development that created both opportunities and enormous dangers. David, why are you telling me this? Because I signed up to work security for a business transition, not to participate in murder. There are lines I won't cross. And what do you expect in return for this intelligence? Nothing. I made poor judgment in supporting Tony's operation, but I won't be party to killing Vincent's son. Roman felt a grudging respect for David's position. What's the timeline? Tonight, Tony's hired guns are planning to intercept you between your office and home. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Location, probably the Queensboro Bridge approach. Limited visibility, multiple escape routes. Easy to stage a car accident that turns violent. Roman spent the next hour coordinating with Morrison and Detective Santos to arrange appropriate response to Tony's planned attack. The legal framework was clear. A legitimate business leader defending against criminal assault had every right to protective measures, including private security and law enforcement coordination. More importantly, Tony's decision to hire professional killers had elevated his criminal activities to a level that would justify federal racketeering charges and potential life sentences. But Roman's response would need to be carefully calibrated to ensure Tony's violent intentions were documented and neutralized without creating broader complications for family business operations. By afternoon, Roman had assembled a comprehensive plan that would turn Tony's assassination attempt into the final evidence needed to destroy him completely. Detective Santos arranged for undercover surveillance of the planned ambush location, ensuring law enforcement would have comprehensive documentation of Tony's criminal conspiracy. Morrison coordinated with federal prosecutors to ensure the assassination attempt would trigger additional charges that would eliminate any possibility of Tony ever threatening family interests again. and Roman arranged for private security that would ensure he survived the evening, while providing opportunities for Tony's hired killers to demonstrate their criminal intentions to watching law enforcement. At 6 p.m., Roman left his office following his normal routine, driving his usual route toward the Queensboro Bridge. But his BMW was equipped with bulletproof glass and reinforced armor, while 3 unmarked vehicles carrying federal agents and private security personnel followed at discreet distances. The ambush came exactly where David Chun had predicted. 2 vehicles attempted to box Roman's BMW on the bridge approach, while a third accelerated from behind to force a collision that would disable his car and provide opportunity for the planned assassination. But federal surveillance teams were recording every moment, while Roman security personnel were prepared to respond with overwhelming force. The ambush lasted less than 3 minutes. Tony's hired killers found themselves surrounded by federal agents and private security teams, their weapons confiscated, their communications monitored, and their employer's location tracked through surveillance equipment they hadn't detected. By 8 p.m., Tony Marchetti was in federal custody facing charges that included conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, witness intimidation, and financial crimes. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony was comprehensive, and the sentence would ensure he never threatened anyone again. Roman returned to his office that evening to find a message from Agent Williams requesting a meeting to discuss his cooperation with the federal investigation into Tony's criminal organization. The tone suggested appreciation for Roman's assistance rather than suspicion about his activities. But the evening's most satisfying moment came when Roman received a call from Frank Torino, whose voice carried the desperate calculation of a man who'd gambled everything on the wrong side. "Roman, I think there's been some misunderstanding about my position in recent events." "No misunderstanding, Frank. You chose to support a criminal conspiracy against family business interests. That choice has consequences. I was trying to protect the company during a difficult transition. My judgment may have been poor, but my intentions were. Your intentions were to profit from betraying a man who trusted you for 30 years. Frank, there's no coming back from that level of betrayal. Roman, please. I can provide valuable information about Tony's operation, testify about his criminal activities, help ensure he faces appropriate consequences. Frank, Tony is already facing life imprisonment for conspiracy to commit murder. Your testimony won't be necessary." The silence stretched between them before Frank made one final attempt. "What about my family? My pension? 30 years of loyal service." 30 years of loyal service ended the moment you started planning with Tony. Your family will survive your poor judgment, but they'll do it without family business support. Roman ended the call with the satisfaction of a lesson delivered with appropriate finality. Frank's attempt to return to the family fold after Tony's arrest demonstrated exactly why forgiveness was a luxury legitimate business leaders couldn't afford. By midnight, Roman sat in his father's office reviewing reports from federal investigators, private security teams, and Morrison's legal network. Tony was under federal custody, facing charges that would ensure life imprisonment. Ava had fled New York rather than face potential prosecution as a co-conspirator. Frank Torino and other betrayers were isolated and powerless, their careers destroyed by association with criminal activities. The network of relationships Vincent had built was being restored under Roman's leadership, but with improved security and strategic protections that would prevent future betrayals. Most importantly, Roman had demonstrated to everyone watching that Vincent's son possessed the same ruthless intelligence and strategic thinking that had built the empire they'd attempted to steal. The noose had tightened around his enemies' throats with mechanical precision. Tomorrow would bring the final phase of his campaign, ensuring that the lessons learned from Tony's destruction would deter any future challenges to family authority. But tonight, Roman Castellano was no longer the inexperienced heir his enemies had underestimated. He was the undisputed leader of an empire, forged in betrayal and tempered by the necessity of absolute victory. The Predator had proven his dominance. Now, it was time to ensure that dominance was never questioned again. Chapter 9. Perfect Execution. 6 months after Tony's arrest, Roman stood in the renovated conference room of Castellano Industries, addressing a carefully selected group of new senior executives. The morning sun illuminated faces that belonged to people who understood loyalty, competence, and the consequences of betrayal. The transformation of the company had been systematic and complete. Every department head who'd participated in the conspiracy had been replaced by professionals whose backgrounds Morrison had vetted personally. The organizational structure had been redesigned to prevent future coups while maintaining the operational flexibility Vincent had built into family business. Ladies and gentlemen, this company exists because my father understood that sustainable success requires both strategic vision and tactical precision. Moving forward, those principles will guide every decision we make. The new CFO was Maria Santos, Detective Santos's younger sister, whose MBA from Wharton and background in forensic accounting made her ideally suited for managing complex financial operations. Her family connection to law enforcement provided additional security against future legal complications. The new head of security was Colonel James Mitchell, recently retired from military intelligence, whose understanding of operational security and threat assessment far exceeded David Chen's capabilities. Mitchell's background included counterintelligence work that would prove invaluable for protecting family business interests. Sandra Walsh's replacement as head of human resources was Dr. Patricia Novak, whose psychology doctorate and corporate consulting experience gave her sophisticated understanding of personnel management and loyalty assessment. Her hiring protocols would ensure future employees understood family business values before being granted positions of trust. But the morning's most important business was reviewing the final resolution of threats that had emerged during the succession crisis. Colonel Mitchell, please update us on Tony Marchetti's current status. Mitchell consulted his tablet with military precision. Federal prosecutors secured convictions on 15 felony charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, financial fraud, and organized criminal activity. Sentence: for consecutive life, terms without possibility of parole. Currently housed in ADX Florence Maximum Security Facility. Roman felt no satisfaction in his cousin's destruction, only the cold acknowledgement that necessary justice had been served. Tony's attempt to steal Vincent's empire through betrayal and violence had earned him exactly the consequences such actions deserved. And the associates who supported his operation? Frank Torino pled guilty to financial fraud and conspiracy charges. Sentence: 15 years federal prison. David Chun received 10 years for his cooperation in the murder conspiracy. Sandra Walsh accepted a plea agreement for 5 years in exchange for testimony about the financial aspects of the conspiracy. Each name represented a person who'd chosen betrayal over loyalty, personal profit over family honor. Their destructions had been comprehensive and permanent, serving as object lessons for anyone who might consider similar disloyalty in the future. Dr. Novak, what's the status of personnel security protocols? Patricia Novak's response reflected the systematic approach to human resources that Roman had implemented throughout the organization. All current employees have undergone comprehensive background investigation and psychological assessment. New hiring protocols include extensive reference checks, financial review, and graduated access to sensitive information based on demonstrated loyalty over time. And former employees seeking reinstatement. None have been approved. Personnel who participated in the conspiracy have been permanently barred from any association with family business operations. Roman had been approached by dozens of former employees seeking to return to family employment, claiming their involvement with Tony had been coerced or misunderstood. Each request had been denied without consideration. Forgiveness was a luxury that invited future betrayal. Maria, financial recovery status? Maria Santos's report reflected the systematic rebuilding of financial operations under new management. All assets stolen or misappropriated during the conspiracy have been recovered through federal restitution orders. Company reserves have been rebuilt to pre-crisis levels. New financial controls prevent unauthorized access while maintaining operational flexibility. But Roman's most significant achievement had been the complete restoration of political and business relationships that Tony's aggression had damaged. Albert, relationship management update. Morrison smiled with satisfaction that reflected successful completion of a complex campaign. All key political relationships have been restored to pre-crisis levels. Several contacts have expressed appreciation for the professional manner in which recent difficulties were resolved. The network is stronger now than it was under your father's leadership. Judge Blackwell had become one of Roman's most reliable allies, appreciating the sophisticated approach to mutual benefit that contrasted sharply with Tony's crude intimidation tactics. Councilman Hendricks regularly sought Roman's input on municipal issues affecting business interests. State Senator Walsh had invited Roman to participate in economic development initiatives that would benefit family operations. The shadow network Vincent had built through decades of careful relationship management was now functioning under Roman's direction with improved security and strategic coordination. And law enforcement relationships. Detective Santos continues to provide community liaison services that benefit both family business and municipal law enforcement. Federal prosecutors have expressed appreciation for your cooperation during the Tony Marchetti investigation. FBI Financial Crimes Division considers our organization a model for corporate cooperation with federal law enforcement. Roman's decision to present family business as a victim of Tony's criminal conspiracy rather than a participant in questionable activities had positioned the organization as a law enforcement ally rather than a target for investigation. But the meeting's final agenda item addressed the personal consequences of betrayal that had made this transformation necessary. Ava Marchetti's current status? Morrison's expression grew cold. Your former wife relocated to Los Angeles following her divorce filing withdrawal. She's attempting to establish an art gallery using funds she removed from joint accounts before federal asset freezes were implemented. Roman had allowed Ava to escape with a small portion of money she'd accumulated independently, recognizing that completely destroying her would serve no strategic purpose. But escape didn't mean forgiveness. Her business prospects? Limited. Gallery financing has been difficult to secure due to background checks that reveal her involvement in the conspiracy. She's operating on minimal capital with poor prospects for expansion. Roman had ensured that Ava's betrayal would follow her permanently, making success in her chosen field nearly impossible without directly threatening her safety. She would live with the consequences of her choices without enjoying the benefits she'd attempted to steal. The meeting concluded with reports on new business opportunities that Roman's strengthened organization was pursuing, legitimate contracts that built on Vincent's foundation while expanding into areas that would ensure long-term family prosperity. As executives filed out of the conference room, Roman remained standing at the window that offered views of the Manhattan skyline, where Vincent had first taught him to recognize opportunity and assess threats. The empire was secure, stronger than before the succession crisis, and protected by improved security protocols that would prevent future betrayals. The political network was functioning smoothly under leadership that understood sophisticated relationship management. The financial foundations were solid and growing under professional management that prioritized sustainable growth over short-term profit. Most importantly, everyone connected to family business now understood that loyalty was rewarded generously while betrayal was punished without mercy or forgiveness. Roman's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Roman, I made terrible mistakes. Is there any possibility of forgiveness and reconciliation? Ava. His response was immediate. No. The word carried the finality of absolute judgment. Ava had chosen betrayal over loyalty, conspiracy over marriage, personal profit over family honor. Those choices had consequences that would last forever, regardless of regret or desperation. Roman deleted the message and blocked the number, erasing the last connection to a woman who demonstrated that beautiful faces often concealed poisonous intentions. As afternoon shadows lengthened across his office, Roman reviewed the strategic position he'd achieved through systematic destruction of his enemies. Tony would spend the rest of his life in maximum security prison, his criminal empire dismantled, and his associates scattered or imprisoned. Frank Torino and other conspirators faced lengthy sentences that would ensure they never threatened family interests again. Ava lived in exile, her betrayal following her like a curse that would prevent success or happiness. The lessons were clear and comprehensive. Loyalty to the Castellano family was rewarded with prosperity and protection, while betrayal was met with destruction so complete that mercy became irrelevant. Roman had inherited Vincent's empire and earned the right to expand it through demonstration of the same ruthless intelligence and strategic thinking that had built the foundation of family power. The succession crisis was over. The empire was secure, and everyone who might consider future challenges understood exactly what happened to those who confused Vincent's son's youth with weakness. Roman Castellano had proven himself worthy of his inheritance through fire and blood, betrayal and vengeance. Now he would build on that foundation with the knowledge that true power came not from fear alone, but from the absolute certainty that betrayal carried consequences too terrible to risk. The war was won. The empire was his, and forgiveness was a luxury he would never offer to those who'd chosen to be his enemies. Perfect execution of perfect justice. Vincent would have been proud. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.